Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Luffy Married Amande and Had a Daughter. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Hey look, there's Raftal, Luffy said looking at the front of his boat with a wide grin on his face. Finally they had made it. It had been 5 years since he had taken down Kaido ... but they had finally found the last red poneglyph and made it to Raftal. We finally made it, the world's greatest swordsman Zoro said smiling as he saw the fog-covered island getting closer. Up daddy, wanna see? The little 3-year-old girl held her arms up for her daddy to pick her up, causing Luffy to laugh and swing his daughter up onto his shoulders. So that's the finish line, huh? Nami said as she began to map out the ocean currents and all around the island, barely restraining herself from leaping ahead like Luffy usually did to map out the final island in the new world. Looks like we made it, Sonny. Super, Frankie said with a grin and tears in his eyes. He finally saw his ship to the finish line. Yo ho ho ho, this calls for a feast and a song. Brook cried as he scooped up his violin and began playing a song for them, causing the crew to cheer as he played Bink's sake. Daddy King no. Luffy's 3-year-old daughter, little Pixie, said clapping her hands happily. And that makes you my little pirate princess and your mommy my queen. Luffy said covering his daughter's face with kisses and making her giggle while her mother laughed as she stepped over to her husband. Not to mention the new baby is going to be another prince or princess of pirates, the new pirate queen said with a smile and a hand on her belly which flat at the moment. They had learned about the new baby just barely a week ago, their second baby. Out of all of the supernova, of course it would be you to become king. Jewelry Bonnie said from where she was standing by Robin, the Straw Hats having rescued her from the Marines 4 years ago and she had just ... sort of never left. Well, I am the last known reader of the poneglyphs and I'd never lead anyone else to the finish line. My captain is the only pirate king I will accept, Robin said with a smile as she looked at Raftal. The true history will be on the island. She couldn't wait to finally read it. Alright, the food is almost ready, Sanji called from where he was grilling a fish from the North Blue while also chopping up a South Blue fish for a salad. They had found the All Blue not too far away and Sanji had stocked up on fish and had Nami make a specific map just for the All Blue, a map that she let him keep and he carried it with him everywhere. He couldn't wait to sail back to the Barady and show the old geezer. You remembered to make baby healthy food for the queen, didn't you? Chopper asked, frowning at Sanji who pouted slightly at being reminded that his idiot rubber brain captain got more love from a woman than he did. Yep, got it right here, Sanji said motioning to a plate that was almost as stacked up high as Luffy's was but was filled with food that would contain all the nutrients needed to ensure that the unborn baby was healthy and strong when he or she was born. Honestly you guys, I'm barely even a month along, the new pirate queen said shaking her head bemused but she was smiling. She didn't mind them being protective of Pixie or the baby, but she did get annoyed when they got so protective and smothering of her. She was a full-grown woman for C's sake. You're still carrying precious cargo, Luffy said wrapping his arms around her and pulling her close, stretching out his legs and neck a bit so that he was just a little taller than her. He knew that while she liked being so tall, she liked it better sometimes when he stretched so that he was taller than her and she could bury her face in his chest. Mama up, Pixie said reaching her arms up to her mother who picked her up and held her baby girl close to her chest. We're about to dock, Jim called from the ship's wheel, causing the small family to look up in time for the ship to pull to a stop and the anchor to drop. I can see the poneglyph. With your permission, Captain, I'll take Nami and go over there, Robin said looking from the large rock to her captain who grinned at her. Go fulfill your dream, Robin, Luffy said causing her to smile brightly, grabbed the already prepared navigator and the both of them dashed off of the boat. Shall we, Captain? Jim asked smiling at his captain and captain's wife. Let's go, Luffy said picking his wife and child up in his arms and jumping over the side of the ship onto the mist-covered island. Ouch, Luffy and his wife both cried out immediately when their feet hit the shore, and immediately the entire crew was in battle positions around them. Mommy daddy ... back hurts, Pixie whined as she cuddled closer to her mommy who had her eyes narrowed as she glared darkly around the area. Mommy and daddy felt it too, princess, Luffy said as he set his wife on her feet and glared around the area searching for whoever or whatever hurt them. Luffy, you're back. Nami was the one to gasp out as she saw her captain's bare back, the straw hat wearing goofball having decided to forego his vests and shirts when his wife once made a mention of how much she liked seeing him shirtless. As the crew and queen quickly looked to see what was on Luffy's back, he checked on his daughters. These marks ... they must be what happens when the new king lands upon these shores, Robin said humming thoughtfully as she saw the black and gold mark across her captain's toned back that read Second Pirate King in an elegant scroll with a blood red and black crown above it. And since Pixie was here too, she got the mark of the princess, Luffy said letting the others see the pirate princess and the small tiara on his daughter's back. Over the course of a moment or two, the rest of the crew gave startled exclamations when they found different writings and symbols on different parts of their bodies, such as Zoro having King's Swordsman and a katana inked onto his chest. Bonnie was the only one not inked. Well, not that they knew about. It looked like she vanished into the fog and mists. Look out, there's a strong wind, Nami warned when she felt the weather patterns change sharply all of a sudden, distracting her from the King's navigator and picture of a map that was inked onto her stomach. This is no normal wind, Robin exclaimed at the first blast of wind that sent Chopper flying away, with Nami going flying soon after. A wind of change. I've heard about this. Yo ho ho ho, don't fight it, just hang on to each other as much as you can. Brook's words cried at them as he was blown away as well, with Sanji not far behind. Hang on to daddy tight, princess. We're going to try and grab mommy, Luffy said as he held his daughter close and refused to let go, trying to struggle against the wind to reach his wife, who was holding her ground as much as she could while Robin and Frankie were sent flying next. We'll find each other again. We'll all meet up again like last time. I'll find a way to signal you, Luffy called to Zoro and Jimbe as they were sent flying. Luffy was almost to his wife's side now. Luffy, Pixie. She tried to grab her husband and child. She really did, but reaching out for them instead of holding onto her sword like she had been to keep from being sent flying proved to be her undoing. Luffy's eyes widened and he jumped after her, making sure to keep a tight grip on his daughter as he reached for his wife, his queen. The last thing either of them heard before they blacked out was Luffy crying out her name, Ammon. When Luffy came to, the first thing he noticed was his daughter curled up into his side and that his wife wasn't in bed with him. The second thing he noticed was that he wasn't on the sunny. In fact, it looked like he was back in the treehouse. Glancing out of the window, he confirmed that it was exactly where he was. He was back on Dawn Island. Daddy, where's mommy? Pixie asked as she woke up and looked around for her mother. I don't know, sweetie. The strange wind must have blown us to different islands. It's okay though, because mommy is strong. She'll be able to protect herself until you and daddy can find her and protect her, Luffy said, not wanting his daughter to get worried as he picked her up and began to climb down the ladder. Brat, who's the little brat? A familiar voice yelled from behind Luffy, causing him to look shocked for a moment. Daden, but she had died protecting Makino and her baby from the Marines. Daden, Luffy asked, shocked as he stared at his foster mother while Pixie tilted her head at the new lady curiously. Daddy, who that? Pixie asked, making Daden's jaw drop open at the title the small snake neck girl had used for the rubber boy, who suddenly looked a lot older than the bandit leader. Remember, that's Daden's sweetheart. She helped raise Daddy when he was little, Luffy said, causing Pixie to blink slightly. She Daddy's mommy? Pixie asked, making Luffy shrug just a bit and smile sheepishly. Only mommy I ever knew. That makes her your Ba-chan, doesn't it? Luffy asked, suddenly realizing that Daden had died before Pixie was born. Pixie only heard of some stories about the woman. This was the first time his little girl was meeting pretty much the only grandmother who would accept her. She only knew that Big Mom wouldn't. How do you have a 5-year-old daughter already? Daden yelled at Luffy while Pixie grinned toothily, showing her tiny fangs that she inherited from her mother. With her snake neck and the fact that her mother was incredibly tall, she was about the same size as a 5 or 6-year-old, so it was no surprise Daden got the age wrong. I3, Pixie said, holding up 4 fingers by accident and making Luffy smile and kiss her curly blue hair. She was almost a clone of her mother, but she had Luffy's smile and his nose. One too many fingers, sweetheart, Luffy said, gently folding one of the tiny fingers down so that she displayed the correct number of fingers. 3, Pixie said, beaming and now holding up the correct number of fingers. How the hell do you have a 3-year-old daughter? You're only 17. Daden shouted at Luffy again, making him blink before grinning. Shishishishi. Raftal must have blown us not only to different islands but also back in time, sweetheart. This is where Daddy was raised before he became a pirate. If the 2 of us are on this island at this point in time, then mommy and the others must be back where they were before Daddy met them. Luffy tried to explain what he thinks happened to his little girl, causing her to look confused. Lost, Uncle Zoro? Pixie asked, making Luffy laugh again while Daden was trying to wrap her head around what he said. Back in time, as in he was from the future? Well, that would explain all the new scars, the muscles, why he looked older, and the ink on his back. Yeah, they're all lost and we gotta find them like we do Uncle Zoro, Luffy said, kissing his daughter's forehead with a small grin on his face. It had been hilarious watching Zoro look so embarrassed when the 3-year-old told him he was going the wrong way. Mommy? Pixie asked, making Luffy nod his head. We'll find some way to get to your mommy first. We aren't letting her stay where she is, especially not in her condition, Luffy said as his eyes flashed dangerously. If Big Mom found out his wife wasn't part of her crew anymore, or if she found out that Ammon was pregnant, there was no telling what she would do, except that it would not be good for Ammon and the baby. If there was one scratch on his wife when he got to her, he was going to burn Big Mom's entire island down with her still on it. Around that same time on Nuts Island, Pix, Lou, Ammon shot awake in an instant as she looked around for her husband and child, only to have to pause when a wave of nausea hit her. Izzy baby, we have to find your daddy in. Ammon put a hand on her belly and began to talk to the child within it, like she had done when pregnant with Pixie, when she noticed that she wasn't on the Sunny. No, looking around, Ammon noticed that she was in her room back on Nuts Island. Thankfully, she didn't have any homies in her room who could report her out-of-character actions back to her mother. Nuts Island, I'm still alive. There's no chains or shackles ... and my siblings aren't even trying to attack me ... What's going on? Ammon noted all the things that were honestly freaking her out at the moment. But the way her mother had reacted to Ammon defecting and joining the Straw Hats ... much less about Ammon marrying Luffy and having his child ... she'd never thought she'd get to see her home island again unless she was either dead, die, or a prisoner. Grabbing the newspaper that her servants always left under the door for her, she looked at the date. We've been sent back in time. By the sea, do I hate New World mist and bullshit, Ammon said, sighing as she pinched the bridge of her nose. Feeling a rolling in her stomach that she knew all too well, Ammon headed for her private bathroom without delay. Are you all right, sister Amande? Bruley asked, appearing out of a mirror looking worried when she saw her sister throwing up. I'm fine, Bruley. Must have caught a stomach bug on my last mission is all. Ammon quickly tried to wave her sister off, trying to hide how tense she was when her sister appeared next to her. Better leave quick. Don't want you to catch it, Ammon said, making Bruley look hesitant before nodding. Call through the mirrors if you need me, Bruley said, looking worried but earning a smile and nod from Ammon before Bruley vanished into the mirror, waiting several minutes in case her sister was hanging around or decided to come back out. Ammon let out a sigh of relief when her sister didn't show up again. We have to be careful right now, little one. Your daddy and sister and aunties and uncles aren't here to help mommy, and we're in a very dangerous spot. You can't make mommy sick too often, okay? Ammon asked her unborn child softly, quietly, in case Bruley was listening in from another room, as she rubbed her stomach. Don't worry though, we'll find daddy and the others soon, or they'll come find us. You know how protective your daddy can be, and if you don't yet, you will soon, Ammon whispered with a small smile on her face, although her mind was in a dark spot. What if something happened and Pixie was separated from Luffy before they were sent back in time? Was her baby girl alone and scared and crying for her mommy and daddy? She really needed to make sure her baby was okay. She refused to be anything like her own mother. She refused. She had to make sure her child was safe and happy and healthy, and if someone had hurt a hair on her daughter's heads, then they'd better damn well hope Luffy got to them first. She had earned her title of Demon Lady for a damn good reason, and she'd prove why if anyone even thought about hurting her sweet little girl. It took 2 weeks of Ammon hiding her nausea and morning sickness before she was invited to a tea party that was family only. Sitting at the table and drinking some cold mint tea, she was doing her best to hold down her nausea before any of the family would notice, given the fact that most of her siblings had either gone through pregnancy themselves or with their wives already. And those that hadn't knew about what pregnancy was like for mama, she had to be extra careful that no one noticed the signs. How are you feeling, sister? The stomach bug has gone away by now, hasn't it? Bruley asked worriedly, sitting next to her older sister, who gave her a smile. I'm fine, Bruley. I just have to be careful of what I eat and how much candy I eat, or else I will get sick again, Ammon said, immediately covering for why she wasn't eating any of the sweet treats that were on display at the table in front of her. Stomach bug? Prospero asked, looking at Ammon worried and earning a nod. Yes, I must have caught it on my last mission. It's why I've stayed home, or at least on Nuts Island, the last several days. I did not want to pass it on to anyone else, Ammon said, although she gave her brother a soft smile to reassure him that she was fine. There is something different about you, Amande, Compote said, eyeing her little sister curiously. If she didn't know that her sister was unmarried, and therefore untouched thanks to their mother's laws, she'd have said her sister was pregnant. She had a type of glow to her, although it seemed a bit muted, and she seemed a bit younger than Compote recalled her looking last time she saw her sister. Well, I was sick until recently, Compote, Ammon said dryly in return, although her heart skipped several beats. Her eldest sister had been the one to have the most kids besides their mother. If anyone would recognize the signs of pregnancy, it would surely be Compote or Mama. Not to mention the fact that Bonnie had turned Ammon from 42 in her 20s, so that she was closer age to her husband and able to safely carry and birth any children. Ammon didn't have her mother's iron body after all, so having children while in her 40s was not exactly safe. I don't think that's it, Compote said, but just hummed to herself as she eyed her sister. Speaking of you, Amande, have you finally decided to marry and give me more grandchildren? Big Mom asked with a grin as she looked away from her conversation with Oven and Deifuku on the next island to be conquered. Ammon's eyes widened for just a second. Thankfully, her hat kept them from her siblings' view, as she thought quickly. She had forgotten her mother had asked her this before deciding to marry, putting off to Sanji. She could use this to her advantage. I think that might be what Compote says seems different about me, actually. I have decided to finally marry, but I'd like to go out past the islands and find a husband myself, Mama," Ammon said, setting her teacup down and making the entire table go silent as they all stared at her in disbelief. Ammon had been pretty much the only daughter to refuse to marry, simply because none of the men her mother was interested in marrying her off to were strong enough for her. Ammon was a minister and combatant first and foremost. Away from the islands, Big Mom asked, her eyes narrowing on her daughter, who stared back up unafraid. Honestly, after fighting Kaido and traveling to Raftal with Luffy and seeing many new things and people, her mother didn't even rate among the top 10 scariest anymore. Well, you know my policy regarding any possible marriage. My husband has to be as strong as, if not stronger, than me in a one-on-one fight. Aside from my brothers who are out for obvious reasons, there is no one in all of Tottoland who can match me in a fight. Leaving Tottoland and looking for someone myself, I stand a much better chance of finding a strong husband, as well as a unique one, Ammon said, knowing exactly what to say to make sure her siblings and mother didn't question her motives. Did she feel bad for manipulating her siblings like this? Yes, a little bit. Was she going to let that stop her? Not at all. Did she feel bad for manipulating her own mother like this? Hell no. Strong and unique, Big Mom murmured as she thought about it, making Ammon nod her head. Yes, I figure if he's as strong as I am and unique, then any children we have would be naturally strong and unique as well, Ammon said without batting an eye and making her siblings know where she was going with that immediately. Strong and unique husband meant Mama's approval. Strong and unique children meant that Mama wouldn't hurt them. All of the siblings that had children of their own inwardly applauded their sister's idea. It was a surefire way to keep their mother from ever attacking or killing whoever Ammon married and any children she had. Mama, good thinking, Ammon. As soon as we're done here, you can take one of the tart ships and some homies and go find yourself a husband, Big Mom said, making Ammon smile slightly, glad that it worked. Thank you, Mama, but I'm afraid that I should not take a tart ship or homies with me, Ammon said, making Big Mom raise an eyebrow at her daughter. If I were to take a tart ship and homies, then many will assume that I am landing on their islands to slaughter them all and conquer it in your name. That would drive anyone with any brains or usable strength and skills away, and those with unique traits would be much harder to find as well. Perhaps one of the smaller boats and a crew of the servants from my island would be better, Ammon explained to her mother, hiding the real reasons and not showing any hint of deception. After all, the tart ship and homies all report back to Mama, so as soon as they noticed the pregnancy or that something was off with the way Ammon was acting, then she'd be busted in a heartbeat. You could disguise yourself as just another pirate out searching the seas for a husband that matches your standards, when it turns out that you're actually a princess in disguise searching for a suitable prince. How romantic, Praline said, sighing heavily and making Ammon blink before she blushed slightly. That wasn't what she was going for really, but yeah, okay, she'd take her sister's accidental help. Been reading romance novels, Amande? Oven asked with a laugh and making Amande avert her eyes and not say a word. Mama, this sounds like a marvelous prank to play on who you choose as husband. Very well, pick a crew and ship from your island and sail whenever you wish. Just make sure you have a Viver card, eternal log pose that will lead you back home, and a snail. You will have to call us at least once a month to make progress reports, or else I am sending Katakuri and Smoothie to retrieve you. Colette will be taking over your duties as minister, Big Mom said, making Ammon nod and bow her head a bit. Yes, Mama, Ammon agreed before she turned to look at her horned sister, who was busy reading the paper over Montidor's shoulder. Colette, Ammon questioned, making her sister look up confused. Sorry, did you say something, Sister Amande? Colette asked, making Ammon quirk an eyebrow. Her sister was not usually distracted so easily, especially if Mama was talking. You will need to come with me to Nuts Island so that I can tell you what you need to know about being the minister, Ammon said, making Colette blink before nodding her head and glancing at the paper in her hands. Is there something interesting in the paper, Colette? Pudding asked, looking curious about her sister's actions as well and making Colette's cheeks tint pink. She's staring at the newest bounty poster of the guy she considers to be handsome enough for her, Montidor said with a snicker and making Colette whack him upside the head. It's an impressive starting bounty, and he doesn't look like the usual pushovers, not with those muscles and scars, Colette said, blushing a bit and not meeting anyone's eyes. Oh, Big Mom asked, curious about this new bounty. A pirate by the name of Straw Hat Luffy. Apparently he and his crew took out all of the big names in the East Blue, including a fishman that was fried by his navigator using lightning, Montidor said, making Ammon's eyes widen, and she had to refrain from showing her surprise. A devil fruit? Deifuku asked, bored and earning a shake of the head from Montidor. No, from what the newspaper says, it was just using weather conditions. She adjusted them, formed a large lightning bolt, and completely fried Arlong the fishman. Her captain didn't have to do anything at all. The only reason he has the bounty is because of 3 things important, Montidor said, catching everyone's attention. First, he beat all of the other big names with just 1 attack. Second, he completely destroyed a corrupt marine base with 1 attack that apparently involved using hacking. Third, Monty Dore trailed off as he glanced at Ammon, who raised an eyebrow at him. He has a swordsman on the crew. Sister Ammon, his swordsman, defeated Mihawk. This newbie has the world's newest greatest swordsman on his crew, and this Zoro guy seems to be completely loyal. Monty Dore said, making even Big Mom's eyes widen in shock and disbelief. You're joking, Smoothie whispered in disbelief. No, I'm not. Apparently some rookies entered the Grand Line and came across Mihawk, who was bored. When they retreated, he followed them to a floating restaurant in the East Blue where he was challenged by this Rorona Zoro. There are pictures in the paper about the fight. Zoro took Mihawk's head clean off with one of his attacks after about 30 minutes of fighting. Monty Dore said, showing the paper that had the pictures of a man with green hair and 3 swords, 2 of which were broken, delivering the fatal blow to the world's greatest swordsman. I know where I'm starting my search now, Ammon said after a moment of complete silence amongst the table, something unheard of when the Charlottes were all in attendance. Good luck, sister, and don't get killed, Katakuri said, making the others nod in agreement. Namamama, he certainly will be a strong and unique one. Go quickly, Ammon, before you can no longer find him. Big Mom ordered her daughter, who stood from the table and nodded her head. She hid her smile until she was already leaving Nuts Island with a small boat and a crew that was entirely devoted to her and her alone. Rescuing them from a slave ship would have that effect. Hang on, Pixie. Luffy, I'm coming to you, Ammon murmured to the wind as her crew began sailing while Ammon smiled, feeling at home on the sea. None of the crew made any motion that they knew something was off or that she had done or said anything strange when Ammon placed a hand on her stomach where the small baby bump was already starting to form. This baby was going to be bigger than Pixie was. Ammon was sure of that, if only because with Pixie her baby bump hadn't started showing until the 4th month. Don't worry, little one. We're going to find your daddy and sister right now. How that's much higher than it was last time. It didn't get this large until after we rescued Sanji, Luffy said, looking at his wanted poster, which showed him with his hat shading his eyes and his scarred torso on display, and the 1,550,000 bounty on his head. That must have been the picture that was taken when he destroyed the marine base, while Pixie was with Nami and Zoro. Zoro, who was missing an ear, part of his nose, 2 of his fingers, and now had several shiny new scars on his torso and stomach from his duel with Mihawk. He fared better than Mihawk, though, since Mihawk's head was separated from his body after he lost his right arm. They had given him a funeral pyre on his boat with his sword laid on his chest to honor him. That's because you have the world's greatest swordsman as your loyal guard dog, Nami said dryly as she showed Zoro's poster, a snapshot of him taking off Mihawk's arm during the duel. His bounty was as high as Mihawk's had been when he became a warlord. Ruff ruff, Zoro barked from where he was sitting with Pixie crawling all over him happily, although she was being careful of his wounds. And barking had Pixie squealing in laughter as she rolled off of his lap only to be caught by one strong hand. Easy, little princess, don't get hurt, Zoro said, smiling softly at the pirate princess, who was still giggling as she crawled all over him again. Want to see Uncle Smokey again, princess? Want to see him look completely shocked? Luffy asked, scooping his daughter up into his arms and making her nod happily. She thought her Uncle Smokey was funny, even if her mommy got mad at him for having all that smoke around her. "TCH, doing this again, huh, Captain? Guess I'd better go get the swords," Zoro said with a smirk as he stood and moved towards the dock where they had just dropped anchor at Logtown. "We'll get what we can to keep Mary going for as long as we can, and I'll pick up some extra log poses," Nami said as Usopp nodded in agreement. Everyone splitting up to do their own things. "Stay down here, okay, princess? Daddy doesn't want you getting hurt," Luffy said, pressing a kiss to his daughter's forehead and putting his hand on her head as she nodded. "Oh hey, Buggy, I'm surprised you're trying this," Luffy said, unbothered when he let Buggy capture him and put him in the execution scaffold. "Huh?" Buggy asked, confused, as Alvida charmed a few of the people down below, but Luffy wasn't bothered by her attempts at wooing him. He was happily married and completely devoted to his wife, thank you. Pixie was less than pleased with the lady saying those things to her daddy, though. "After all, you know what the mark on my back means better than anyone else does," Luffy said, making Buggy look confused before looking at Luffy's back. "Gah, how do you have that mark?" "Only those who have made it to Raftal have that mark," Buggy yelled, shocked as he saw the king's crown on Luffy's back, earning shocked or horrified mutters from the civilians. "I'm the king of pirates," Luffy shouted proudly, and earning shocked gasps and horrified yells from the civilians and marines. "How?" Buggy asked, paling horrified since he knew that mark. He knew what it meant. He knew that Luffy wasn't lying. "We reached Raftal, but some strange mist and wind separated us. Now I'm going to find my crew again and go back to Raftal," Luffy said while Zoro and Sanji arrived in the plaza. "I'm going to kill you now, Straw Hat," Buggy shouted, panicked as he lifted the sword. "Sanji, Zoro, Bumi, Usopp, Pixie," Luffy called out loud as his crew stared at him, mentally calling out the names of the others and his wife as the sword began to fall. "But I'm dead," Luffy grinned as the blade came close to his neck. He could see Smoker nearly lose his cigars just before the large lightning bolt struck and set the platform on fire. "Daddy," Pixie cried out, moving as if to run to the platform, but was quickly caught by Sanji. "I'm still alive." "That's nice," Luffy said with a laugh as he stood up unbothered and making Alvida, the Marines, and everyone not one of Luffy's crew jaw drop in horror and disbelief. "Daddy." Pixie quickly ran to her daddy and jumped into his arms as she jammed his hat onto his head. "Hey there, my little princess. Don't worry, Daddy's all right." Luffy quickly soothed his daughter as he kissed her head, holding her close and rubbing soft circles on her back. "I'ma tell Mama you was stupid," Pixie said, making Luffy grin at his daughter. "That's fine with me, sweetheart. Me being stupid is what led to me and Mommy having you, not to mention the new baby on the way," Luffy said with a laugh, recalling how exactly his wife reacted when he did something stupid. She seemed to like his stupid antics since they were fairly sure Pixie was conceived during one session after a particularly stupid stunt. He was 90% sure the new baby was conceived after he nearly fucked her silly when they got out of one battle where he decided the best way to take out the enemy was to tackle the rival devil fruit user into the sea. She had said that if he ever scared her like that again, then he would be sleeping in the brig, when he pointed out that it was the only way to save Pixie from being targeted by an attack. Well, she wasn't able to walk straight for the next 2 days. "Going to find Mommy?" Pixie asked, making Luffy smile and nod as he began walking to his boat while Zoro gave Tashagi a reality check on what swords were made for, and it wasn't to be used as wall decorations. "That's right, sweetheart. We're going to the Grand Line and we're going to find Mommy and your Auntie Robin and uncles," Luffy said, completely ignoring Smoker, who was rushing towards him to stop the rubber captain. "Unhand the child's straw hat," Smoker snarled as Luffy easily avoided the jab without looking. "Why would I let my daughter go?" Luffy asked, blinking confused at Smoker, whose eyebrow twitched at this. "You're a pirate. You probably kidnapped that girl. She looks nothing like you," Smoker snarled, looking at the girl's elongated neck, slightly greenish skin, curly blue hair, and dark green eyes. "You're right. She takes after her incredibly beautiful mother. But she has my nose and my smile, and trust me, she's my little princess," Luffy said, pressing a kiss to his daughter's hair. "Still not letting you go anywhere," Smoker said, grunting slightly as he pointed his Jude at Luffy, who frowned at this. "My wife is currently somewhere on the Grand Line, on a hostile island, and is pregnant. I'm not leaving her there, so I can either knock you out and go get her, or you can get out of my way," Luffy said, with his hat shading his eyes as he flared his haki a bit, causing Smoker to sweat a bit and back up a step. "Or you could just turn around," a familiar voice said, causing Luffy's head to whip around immediately at near neck-breaking speeds. "How?" Luffy asked, gaping at his wife, who was standing behind him in her normal dress, although it was stretching slightly over the swell of her stomach. "Mama let me go find a strong and unique husband a few weeks ago. Got a crew of those loyal only to me, and a boat that isn't a homie, and followed what the newspaper said about you and the others. See stone bottom on the boat so we could go through the calm belt," Ammon said, walking towards her husband, who grinned widely. "Mommy," Pixie cried happily as she was plucked from Luffy's arms, and Ammon looked relieved as she pressed kisses to her daughter's hair. "I saw what you pulled up there on the stand, Luffy," Ammon said, looking at her husband, who gave her a sheepish smile and shrug while Smoker was gaping at the impressive height of the woman. "Sorry?" Luffy asked, making Ammon smile as she stepped over to him while he stretched his legs out to her favorite height. "I haven't laughed that hard since you pranked those Marines. As long as you promise to be gentle, I can give you a small reward," Ammon said, her eyes lidded slightly as she stepped closer to him. He just laughed and pulled her close to his chest. "I'm always gentle, until you beg me for more," Luffy pointed out with a grin as he held her close. "Idiot. Don't be saying things like that around Pixie," Ammon said, blushing slightly and trying to hide it as she buried her face in his chest. "Shishishi. Sorry. Don't repeat nothing Daddy says, sweetheart. Daddy grew up with mountain bandits," Luffy said, pressing a kiss to Ammon's forehead and then Pixie's as he placed one hand on his wife's stomach, feeling the small but their baby bump. "What was that?" Ammon asked, not looking up as she felt her husband move slightly. "Just knocking Smokey out. Nothing important," Luffy said, not bothered by how easily he took out someone who nearly stopped his adventure before he got to the Grand Line last time. "Let's get back to the ship. I don't want any of the Marines trying to hurt you three. I'd destroy the entire island," Luffy said, making Ammon nod her head before they started walking back to the ship, with Pixie being held close by her mother. "Oh hi Dad. Did you come to see your granddaughter?" Luffy asked, looking at the man in the hood who was standing off to the side. "Gigi," Pixie squealed. Ammon laughed at the look of shock and disbelief on Dragon's face. He looked like he had been slapped with a fish. "So you're going to sail with us from here?" Zoro asked, looking at his queen, who nodded her head as her loyal servants ran around making sure the boat was in tip-top shape and that her things were loaded aboard. "Yes, I want to be there for the rest of the adventures. Besides, I'm not stupid enough to think you lot wouldn't follow me if I tried to leave." You all are very overprotective, Ammon said, more amused than anything as she sat on one of the lawn chairs and Sanji hurriedly brought out a smoothie for her. He looked alarmed when her face turned greener than normal and she hurriedly dashed to the side of the boat to hurl up her lunch. Sorry Sanji-san. Strawberries seemed to help set off my morning sickness. Ammon apologized as Luffy rubbed her back. Usopp solved the problem by taking the strawberry smoothie and giving it to one of Ammon's servants and told him to drink it. Seeing what the smell of strawberries had done to his mistress, he hurriedly drank it down, then went to wash the dish and his mouth out so that there was no more lingering strawberry scent. Last time it was blackberries and peanuts that set you off, Luffy said, stretching out so that Ammon could recline against him while Sanji hurriedly went to make a different smoothie and hand all of the strawberries on board over to Ammon's servants. Each pregnancy is different. I know that much just from watching my mother have my younger siblings, Ammon said, resting her head on his chest as he wrapped his arms around her while Pixie quickly brought her mother a glass of water. Mommy sick? Pixie asked, making Ammon smile as she pulled her daughter into her lap. No, sweetheart. The baby just doesn't like strawberries. Mommy is fine, Ammon reassured her daughter, who snuggled close and placed her ear to her mother's stomach. Time to set sail for the reverse mountain, Nami said, snapping off orders immediately to everyone except for the small family as Luffy bodily lifted his wife and settled her on the lawn chair. Pixie curled up on top of her mother and Luffy quickly laying down beside Amande and holding her close. If you want, we can drop you off at the first island on the Grand Line and you all can live out your lives however you wish, away from Mama's tax and tyranny. Ammon spoke, looking at her servants who were running around helping or hovering over her worriedly. I think I speak for all of us, mistress. When I say that we wish to stay where you are. You saved us and we swore ourselves to you and your descendants as gratitude. We can't follow that oath if we aren't here with you and the little mistress. One of the women, a blonde woman who was of the Long Arm tribe, said, smiling at Ammon. You don't have to serve me, Ammon said, sweat dropping slightly when all four of the others nodded their heads. Out of the group of 5, including the blonde Long Arm, there was 2 fishmen, 1 Long Arm, and 2 who had devil fruit powers. She had saved all 5 when she had single-handedly destroyed a slave ship that she found while retrieving an ingredient for her mother. Don't have to, but we still will. No matter what, you'll always be our mistress, your husband our master, and your children our young mistresses or masters, one fishman said with a grin as he helped move the supplies below deck with Zoro and the other fishmen. Well, if you're going to be staying with the crew, then you should all line up and tell my husband your names and what you can do. He is the captain after all, Ammon said, sighing, but knowing that no matter what she said and did, then they wouldn't betray her. They had all died last time protecting her when she had been pregnant with Pixie after all, and they had done it with smiles on their faces. All right, line up you guys. A rather normal-looking woman with red hair, and not orange like Nami's but like blood red, called, making the others finish what they were doing and line up in front of the lawn chair. Sound off your names and abilities for the captain. The redhead barked at them as she stood at the end of the lineup. My name's Ella. I'm a Long Arm, obviously. And out of the best of us, I'm the best with observation haki. I do know a bit of armament, however, and I'm mainly a dagger fighter, the blonde-haired Long Arm said, introducing herself and pulling out her 2 daggers that were sheathed at her hips. I'm Jalon. I'm a fishman, obviously, but I'm an orca fishman. That means that not only am I 10 times stronger than the normal human like all fishmen, but I can communicate with whales, breath underwater, and use some fishman karate that I taught myself. I'm best at hand-to-hand fighting and I know armament haki. Not too good with observation though, the deep blue-skinned fishman said as he blew some of his shoulder-length green hair out of his face. I'm Danja. I'm a hammerhead shark fishman, and can do all that normal fishmen can, like breathing underwater and all. I'm pretty good at fishman karate and have been trying to teach Jalon, but it's been slow going. I'm decent at armament haki and observation haki, and I'm pretty good with a warhammer. I'm also an experienced rigger man and can navigate in a pinch, the fishman with the wider-than-average head said, bowing his head to his new master. Name's Celsa. I'm pretty much your average woman from West Blue, but I was sold into slavery because of my Zoan fruit. I ate the snake Zoan model saw-scaled viper. Makes me venomous and I can take on a snake form, but I'm not as big as, say, the king cobra or anaconda models. Good at observation haki and I'm a pretty good spy, but when I need a weapon I usually use throwing weapons like needles and throwing stars, the brown red-haired girl said, and she didn't really look all that different from any other person ... if it weren't for her fangs and her skin, which looked like she had an uneven tan at first but was actually scales. Name's Braca. I was a Marine Vice Admiral until a celestial noble saw my devil fruit in action and wanted me to be his slave. Marines sold me off without thinking twice. I know observation and armament haki and I'm good with a sword or a gun. I ate the Jin Loja, so I'm literally made of and can control silver. The red-haired woman said, looking annoyed by what the Marines had done, even as she held out her arm and dripped some molten hot silver from her body, quickly pulling it back into her body before it could hit and damage the deck. I have leadership experience if you need someone to keep people in line, and I'm a pretty good prison warden if we take captives, Braca said, shrugging at the end while Nami's eyes had bully signs in them. No, Nami. Luffy and Ammon both spoke without even looking at the navigator, who pouted while Pixie giggled at her Auntie Nami's funny actions. Nice to meet you all. I'm Monkey D. Luffy, the new Pirate King, and I ate the gum fruit, which means I'm made of rubber. You know my wife Monkey Amande, and this is our daughter Monkey Pixie, Luffy said, grinning at them all and making them nod back, bowing in respect. Anyone who got their mistress's respect and love to the point where she carried his name and his child was someone incredibly strong. The fact that he had the new world's greatest swordsman on his crew only helped that notion. Oh yeah, we need to come up with a name for the new baby, don't we, Amma? Luffy asked, not looking bothered as Nami barked orders for going up the mountain, although they weren't too bothered by it. They had already done this after all. For a girl, how about? Aries, for a boy. I'm thinking Taurus, Ammon asked, thinking about it for a moment and making Luffy grin as he kissed her cheek. Any name you decide on is fine with me. You're doing all the hard work after all. Luffy agreed, making her smile and lean into him some more until a cry from Ella was heard. There's a whale in the way, Ella yelled, sounding worried and making Luffy blink. Oh, that's Laboon. I'll be right back, Luffy said, kissing Ammon's cheek again before standing up and moving to the front of the ship. Gear third, Luffy said, growing both of his arms to supersize, much to the newcomer's disbelief, before he pushed Laboon out of the way as gently as he could. Holy shit, Celsa muttered, earning a slow nod of agreement from Danja as the newcomers gaped at their rather slim captain. They knew he was pretty muscular, but he certainly didn't look strong enough to just push aside a mountain whale with ease. Does anyone else hear that? Usopp asked, tilting his head as he heard something coming from the whale. It sounded familiar. Yo-ho-ho-ho, yo-ho-ho-ho. That's Brook, Luffy said with a grin as his eyes widened. His musician had achieved his dream and kept his promise. The crew members that had been to Raftal all let out a hearty cheer as the whale's mouth opened to show a singing skeleton who was playing the violin. The newcomers could only stare in disbelief and shock as all of the veteran members began singing Bink's sake right along with the skeleton. What the hell kind of crew did they join? After listening to Brook's tale of beating the man who had his shadow and then hitched a ride with a merchant ship to Laboon, Ammon sighed heavily as she pulled out her personal snail. I have to call my mother once a month or else she will send Smoothie-chan and Katakuri Nai-chan to retrieve me. Please ... be quiet unless I ask you a question or she asks to speak to you ... and even then, please make no mention of my pregnancy or that you know who she is, Ammon said, looking at everyone as Laboon and Crocus decided to come with them. Crocus staying in Laboon, of course, while Vivi and Mr. Nine were tied up in the brig being watched by Braca. Mommy's mommy, Pixie asked, making Ammon smile at her daughter and nod, although she was a bit sad. That's right, baby. Mommy's mommy. She doesn't know about you yet and I don't want her to hurt you ... so why don't you go help Braca watch the prisoners? You can take Danja with you, Ammon said, running her hand through her daughter's hair and making the little girl look a bit upset but nod and tug on the fishman's hand until he obediently followed her to the brig. Hey, who is this? Big Mom demanded after Ammon dialed the snail and it was answered on the first ring. Mama, it's Amande, Ammon said, her face set into its normal melancholic expression that was shown over the snail. Oh, Amande, how's your search going? Big Mom asked, making Ammon glance over at Luffy and give a small smile when he walked over to her looking worried and serious. I found someone, Ammon said, making the snail grin widely up at her. Oh, and how strong is he? What about being unique? Big Mom asked, making Ammon smirk slightly. I can confidently say that he is stronger than Katakuri Nai-chan and he is definitely one of a kind, Ammon said, not lying at all and earning wide eyes from the snail. Is that so? Big Mom asked slowly, making Ammon nod her head. You know that I am able to fight Katakuri Nai on even footing for at least 10 minutes ... The man that I chose to be my husband beat me in a spar in less than 1 minute, Ammon said, and she wasn't technically lying right then either. The first time she had sparred with Luffy after joining his crew last time, he had beaten her in 1 minute because she had been underestimating him. Oh, and your progress in getting him to marry you? Big Mom asked, making Ammon look at her wedding ring and smile. He has already given me a ring. It is not official yet, but it is his ring on my finger, Ammon said, and that was true too. While Smoker had married them in the last timeline, they were not officially married in this one. Very good. And the status of possible grandchildren? Big Mom asked, making Ammon frown slightly since she had to lie right now and she hoped the few siblings who could tell when she did lie wasn't around at the moment. Your laws state that I am to be untouched until marriage, Mama. There are no children on the way yet until the marriage is official, Ammon said, making Big Mom frown for a moment as she thought about that. Well, that certainly won't do, Big Mom said, humming as she thought about it, and Ammon held her breath for a full minute while her mother was silent. Tell me of his crew, I presume you have enough standards to choose a captain as your husband? Big Mom asked, finally making Ammon's eyes narrow a bit in worry, but she nodded. Yes, my husband is the captain of this crew. His first mate is the new world's greatest swordsman, Ammon said, making Big Mom quirk an eyebrow, which was kind of funny to see over the snail. And he's just the first mate. Are you sure you should not have chosen him due to him being no doubt stronger than his captain? Big Mom asked, narrowing her eyes and making Ammon shake his head. I made the right choice, Mama. I can put the swordsman on himself if you'd like to hear it from his mouth, but his captain is undoubtedly stronger, Ammon offered, making the snail hum for a moment while Zoro already moved towards it. I want to hear it myself, Big Mom said, making Ammon nod. Zoro? Ammon asked, only to blink when she noticed that he was standing right beside her now. She had been too focused on the snail to notice him moving. Right here, my queen, Zoro said, gently taking the receiver for the snail from the pirate queen. Queen? Big Mom questioned that term immediately. Of course, the only captain worthy of the world's greatest swordsman is the pirate king. That's exactly who my captain is, so that makes the woman he chooses his wife the pirate queen, Zoro said as if it were obvious. Ammon winced at that as she eyed the snail for a moment as everything was quiet. And then she looked relieved when the snail merely gave out a loud laugh. Quite the interesting one you are. Tell me about your captain. Is he really stronger than you? Big Mom demanded with a grin on her face. TCH, no matter how hard I train, no matter how strong I get ... he is always stronger than me. He is the only person I will ever bow my head to and for, Zoro said without hesitation and making Luffy grin at his swordsman, who grinned back. I see. Put my daughter back on, Big Mom said, causing Zoro to hand it over to his queen, who gave him a small smile before she held the receiver up to her mouth again. Tell me about the rest of the crew, Big Mom ordered her daughter, who nodded slightly. There is a cook who is as strong as the swordsman and refuses to waste any food. There is a sniper who has observation haki and can hit anything he aims for. I have yet to see him miss a shot. The navigator is also a thief who can predict weather patterns and is able to manipulate the weather using science. The most recent addition besides myself and my crew members is a musician who can play any instrument and has the powers of the revive fruit. He is literally a skeleton with an afro, Ammon said, listing off the crew and deliberately not adding on Laboon or Crocus just in case. Mama, quite the interesting bunch, Big Mom said with a laugh and making Ammon smile as she looked at her crew ... her nakama ... her new family. Yes, and each of them are powerful in their own right. Even the weakest of them, the so-called cowards, who are the navigator and sniper, are at least sweet commander level, if not close to it, Ammon said, making Big Mom look pleased. I see. All of them so strong ... Let me speak to your husband, Big Mom said, making Ammon blink and turn to hand the receiver to her husband. She wants to talk to Yo. Ammon was cut off when Luffy gave her a quick kiss on the lips, taking her by surprise. Luffy, not while my mom is on the snail, Ammon said, blushing when Luffy pulled away. It was just a kiss, Luffy said with an unapologetic grin on his face as he grabbed the receiver. Hello, King of the Pirates here. Can we hurry this up? I want to kiss my queen some more, Luffy asked with a grin, causing Zoro and Nami to laugh loudly as Ammon flustered slightly. She hadn't shown any displays of affection with her husband around her family before, so this was an entirely new area, and by the seas he could not just kiss her and embarrass her while she was on the snail with her mother like that. Mama, you're an interesting one for sure. Tell me, do you truly love my daughter? Do you eventually want a family with her? And will you protect her and your family no matter what the cost? Big Mom asked, and the snail had a dark aura around it, but it didn't faze Luffy in the slightest. You're kind of stupid, aren't you? Even the seas went silent when he asked one of the feared Yonko that question, and it took a minute, but you could hear Ammon slapping her palm to her forehead from miles if you tried. I wouldn't marry her if I didn't love her, and of course I want to have a family with her. She'd make an awesome mom for any kids we have ... and if anyone tried to hurt her and our kids. Here Luffy trailed off, and the dark oppressing aura he emitted scared the new crew members and had the fish and creatures in the sea around them floating to the top, most of them dead from the pressure. I'll tear them apart with my bare hands and feast on their bones. Luffy's voice was low, dark, guttural, and all around dangerous as he growled out those words, and while his veteran crewmates weren't bothered, just alarmed at the aura, Ammon had to shift slightly to keep herself in place instead of jumping on her husband. She loved this side of him. She adored what she deemed as his dark side. Mama, put Ammon back on, Big Mom said after she was able to breathe again when the aura disappeared, eyeing the chess peacekeepers and even some of her own children around her who had passed out from the aura that was transmitted through the snail. Yes, Mama, Ammon asked, and her voice even sounded a bit breathless, making Luffy smirk at her, which caused her to pinch him a bit. I approve, and I'll waive the law about remaining untouched until the official ceremony. I want grandkids from you too, ASAP, Big Mom said, grinning widely through the snail and making Ammon nod her head. Understood, Mama. I'm sure my belly will be swelling in no time, Ammon said, earning a nod from her mother before the snail went back to sleep after her mother hung up. As soon as she placed the snail down, Ammon jumped on Luffy and nearly tackled him to the deck as she ravished his mouth with her own. You are so getting some. Let's get to our room now, Ammon said, breathless after she pulled away while Luffy's arms were wrapped securely around her and he merely grinned at her. You know I don't mind at all, but we'll have to wait until night time when Pixie is asleep. Then I'll take you all night long until you're unable to walk, Luffy said, growling the last bit in her ear and making her look upset but eager at the same time. Oh, she couldn't wait, even though this was likely going to mean she was carrying twins. She wanted her husband in her, in every way and all night, and he was more than able and happy to oblige her. Oh, an island with cactus rocks. I don't think I've ever heard of that, Ammon said from where she was sitting on the lawn chair a day or two later, trying her best not to move too much. After putting Pixie to bed, the couple quickly made their way to the second ship, the one Ammon had brought with her, and proceeded to work out any sexual tension between them that had developed since they were separated. Right now, it really was a pleasurable soreness in Ammon's body with every move she made, but it was hard to walk without a limp. There's no telling what kind of people live here, Ella said, tensing as they entered the fog around the island and slowly came out of the other side of it. Her jaw dropped open when they came out in the middle of what looked like a large party, one that was being held for them despite them being pirates. A town that welcomes pirates. Now I've truly seen it all, Braca said in disbelief, earning mutters of agreement from the others that came from Nuts Island. Brook just laughed and played along with the music on his guitar. This is actually pretty tame for us. You can go ahead and release the prisoners now, by the way, Luffy said, glancing at the prisoners who were tied up by Braca's feet so that she could keep a close eye on them. Aye, Captain. Zoro obeyed without hesitation as he unsheathed one sword and sliced the ropes clean in half without once grazing the two prisoners, who nearly fainted at that. Why'd you do that? Daja asked in disbelief as they watched the prisoners jump overboard quickly. Watch, Luffy said, making everyone watch as the two swam to the other side of the channel and quickly got out of the water, helped by some of the islanders. Trap. Braca didn't hesitate to say what they were all thinking and earning a nod from Luffy. Probably bounty hunters if they're this happy to see pirates. I know you're able to protect yourself, but I'd like it if you and Pixie stayed with me. I'd hate to sink an island because they hurt either of you by accident, Luffy said, looking at his wife, who looked ready to argue but was cut off before she started by Pixie placing her head on top of her stomach. That's right, she's pregnant. That threw off her entire center of balance, and straining herself or fighting ran the risk of hurting or even killing the little ones inside of her. That was one thing she couldn't and wouldn't stand for or let happen. All right, Ammon relented, making Luffy grin as Nami and Usopp lowered the plank. All right, let's play along for now, but as soon as they make a move, be ready. Someone tell Laboon and Crocus to be on standby and that we'll bring them back some food, Luffy said, making the crew nod their heads while Jalan dived underwater to follow orders. Hello and welcome, excuse me. Mama, welcome to Whiskey Peak, a man with his hair in curls said, smiling and tuning his voice as he spoke to the pirates when Luffy and the crew descended the plank. Luffy had his legs stretched out so that he was taller than Amande, making quite a few of the islanders pale. Hello, we're the Straw Hats. I'm Luffy. This is my wife Amande and our daughter Pixie. To my right is my swordsman and first mate, Zoro. On my left, probably going all noodle style over the women, is my chef Sanji. The orange-haired woman is our navigator Nami. Next to her is Ella, our lookout, which is the blonde woman. Celsa, our spy, is the woman with the patterned tan, and the redhead is our brig warden Braca. In the very back is our sniper Usopp. The rigger man Daja, who is the bald one. The green-haired one is Jalan, our underwater expert, and last but never least is Brook. He's our musician, Luffy said, making the introductions and causing the crew to nod or wave at the crowd. I don't believe I've ever seen such unique people before. Tell me, is that because of a devil fruit? A nun with a high-pitched voice asked, looking at Amande, Pixie, Ella, Daja, and Jalan while not thinking anything of Celsa's weird tan or Brook's skeleton costume. No, not at all. I'm a hammerhead shark fishman, and Jalan here is an orca fishman. We're pretty hard to find in the blues or this side of the Grand Line, so I'm not surprised you haven't seen one of us before, Daja said, shrugging his shoulders as he finished tying the ships to the dock. It wasn't necessary, but it gave him something to do to avoid all the stares. I'm from the long arm tribe, so I have an extra elbow and all the arm length that goes with it. No devil fruit required, Ella said with a cheerful wave that showed off her extra elbow. I'm half snake neck. We're hard to find in these parts, so I'd be more suspicious if you said you had seen someone like me before. Pixie here is 1/4 snake neck, which is why her neck is smaller than mine, although it is largely in part due to the fact that she's so little. She'll grow into it, Ammon said, smiling up at her daughter, who was currently riding on her daddy's shoulders and saying that she could see almost the entire town. What about you, young man? One is not normally that tall, the apparent mayor asked, looking at Luffy, who laughed and let his legs snap back to his normal size, making his daughter cheer and laugh at the almost roller coaster-like sensation of him retracting and his body bouncing a bit like a rubber spring as he settled. Mine is a devil fruit. I ate the gum fruit, so I'm a rubber man. Luffy said as the crowd seemed impressed or shocked by the trick he had just performed. Glancing over at his wife, Luffy set his daughter down and waited for a second as she immediately ran to Brook, who swung her up onto his shoulders. Come, let us hold a celebration in your honor. We would love to. Love to hear tales of your travels, the mayor said, making Luffy nod slightly as he put one hand on his wife's arm and the other on her lower back. Sure, but do you have somewhere Alma can sit down? She shouldn't be standing around too much in her condition, Luffy asked, making Zoro move forward as if to help, while Ammon rolled her eyes but gave a small smile. I'm fine, dear. My ankles are just barely starting to swell, Ammon said, putting a hand on her lower back as well, even though she did grimace a bit since she had been standing up in one place for too long. You're starting to hurt. Do you want me to carry you? Luffy offered, causing her to sigh. She wasn't able to hide the slightest thing from him. She didn't really try usually, preferring to be upfront and honest with her husband. The only time she hid something from him was when she was pregnant with Pixie and didn't know how to tell him the news. Don't you dare. I need to walk around and do my usual routine for as long as I can, or else my ankles will only hurt worse every time I use them, Ammon said, earning a nod of understanding from her husband, while most of the bounty hunter's eyes softened at seeing the two interact, especially since they only just noticed the swell of her stomach since they were looking for it now. Come, we can use the bar. Feel free to order whatever you wish from our menu, the mayor said, motioning to the bar not too far away from them actually, while Sanji disappeared for a moment before returning with a package in his hands. One heat pack for you, my queen. It should help with the worst of it, Sanji said, handing the pack to Ammon, who gave a grateful smile as she took the package and held it to her lower back. She had to bite back a moan that would not be suitable for her daughter to hear because that felt wonderful. This pregnancy is going to be much harder than my last one was, Ammon said as she began walking to the bar, Luffy and Zoro on either side of her, hovering protectively with Luffy's hand on her lower back still. What makes you say that? Zoro asked, raising an eyebrow at his queen, who gave him a deadpan look. With Pixie, my stomach didn't start to swell until around the 5th month when she started kicking, and my ankles didn't swell until I was 4 months along. I'm only 2 months along with this little one, and already both my stomach and ankles are beginning to swell, Ammon pointed out, earning a nod of understanding from the swordsman, while Luffy looked at her for a moment before looking down at her stomach. Maybe it's because you might be having more than one. Twins or triplets would make you start swelling earlier, Luffy said, making Ammon pause and look down at her stomach for a moment as she thought about that. That's true, and twins are more runs in the family, Ammon noted as she stared down at her stomach, while Pixie ran over to her parents, who had sensed her moving with their observation hack. 2 brothers or sisters? Pixie asked, reaching up on her tiptoes to feel her mommy's tummy and causing Ammon to smile softly as she picked Pixie up and settled the 3-year-old on her hip with one arm. Maybe. It could be 3 or even 4 of them. We'll find out once they're out of my belly, sweetheart, Ammon said, kissing her daughter's forehead, while the little girl nodded her head to show she understood. She might be having 1 baby brother or sister, or she could have 5. Ammon was born a Charlotte after all, and most of the women in that family did tend to take after their mother in certain areas. Why did we waste all these resources on those pirates? Since these 2 failed to get the whale meat, we're going to starve, the nun said to 3 others as they stood outside of the bar, and all of them were bathed in moonlight since night had fallen a few hours ago. All of the pirates were knocked out at the moment, either because of the drugs in their food and drinks, or from just plain drinking way too much. They were all asleep inside of the bar, with Ammon curled up into Luffy's side with her head on his chest and their daughter in between them. It was actually a kind of cute scene that made Ms. Wednesday coo at them a bit before she caught herself. I doubt they're worth much, if at all. Their captain is a family man, Mr. 9 said, noting that and causing Mr. 8 to shake his head in the negative. You have not been reading the newspapers. The swordsman is worth over 1 billion birri himself. The captain is worth 1,500,000 birri, and his wife is a New World pirate worth over 700,000 herself, Mr. 8 said, holding up the 3's wanted posters and making the other 3 gape in disbelief and shock and horror. We nabbed people with that big of a bounty, Ms. Monday asked in disbelief as she stared at the posters for Straw Hat, Pirate Hunter, and Demon Lady. We aren't really going to hand the pregnant woman over to the Marines, though, are we? That will leave the little girl without both of her parents. Taking Straw Hat alone will give us more than enough money for a long time, Ms. Wednesday said, looking a bit upset at the thought of breaking that family apart. Looking out for our children. I like this one, dear, a darkly amused voice said, making the 4 whip around to stare at the top of the building in front of them. Sitting on the edge of the building with a very long sword in her hands was Demon Lady Ammon. Behind her was her husband, Straw Hat Luffy, who was grinning wide enough for the moonlight to glint off of his teeth. On the other side of the roof was Zoro holding Watto up so that it glinted in the moonlight. This Monday, 3 of the pirates are missing, one of the cooks said, coming out of the door to the bar and causing the 4 to have a dark look on their faces. They're on the roof, Ms. Wednesday said, not even looking at the Billions agents who soon began to pour out of the buildings. Only this many people against us. I expected better. Baroque works, Zoro said, causing jaws to drop and the bounty hunters to look shocked and horrified. How do you know that name? Mr. 8 asked, making Zoro shrug slightly. He then went on to talk about how they had tried to recruit him before, but he had sent the messenger, the then Mr. 7, back in pieces. Plus, we have our own spy within your ranks. Luffy added that part, thinking about Robin, who they had yet to get into contact with, but he could sense her nearby. If you know so much, then we will have to add more graves to the cactus rocks tonight. Kill them, Mr. 8 ordered, causing the three to stare for a minute before Luffy broke it first by laughing loudly. Once he started laughing, there was no stopping Zoro's loud guffawing or Ammon's almost hissing laughter. And were they imagining it, or was there several other laughs coming from the buildings and even back in the direction of the ship? Such a big statement from Paradise Rejects. Even if I was 8 months pregnant and had a broken arm, I could kill every single one of you without getting my cloths dirty, Ammon said, although Luffy gave her a flat look. Last time you did that, Pixie decided she was ready to come out and meet us. As soon as you hit 6 months, no more fighting, Luffy said sternly to his wife, who sighed but smiled as she nodded. She had learned her lesson with Pixie. She thought she could have handled it, and she did. But apparently that much adrenaline and the stress of battle had caused her to go into labor a month early, and she had never been as scared as she had the moment her water broke as the last enemy fell. For one horrifying moment she was scared she had lost the baby, and the liquid that fell from her was blood. She had been relieved when her beautiful little girl was born happy and healthy, but she never forgot that terrifying moment where she had thought something was wrong. As you wish, my husband, Ammon said, tilting her head back so that she could kiss his cheek. She knew he was just saving her from feeling that helpless and scared again. Oh, I have a lot of wishes. Most of them are what led to us having Pixie, and a few others led to the new baby, Luffy said with a grin, making Zoro snort as the bounty hunters looked a bit embarrassed. Ammon just frowned thoughtfully as she tilted her head a bit. The bounty hunters thought she was upset with Luffy or even angry at him. That's not what happened. But I thought it was my idea to use the crow's nest a month before we learned that I was pregnant with Pixie, Ammon asked thoughtfully, and making Luffy frown and thought as well, while the bounty hunter's jaws just dropped at that. Yes, but didn't we go with my idea of using the training room just before that? Not to mention the kitchen and the library. Luffy trailed off, thinking and making the male bounty hunters start developing nosebleeds while most of the women were bright red in the face. But using the brig was my idea. That way we had easier access to the chains, Ammon pointed out with a shiver of remembered pleasure. That was one of their more kinky and passionate romps, and she couldn't wait to do it again. Maybe this time she could talk Luffy into tying her down. Is there any room on the ship you two haven't done it in? I've had to disinfect my training room 4 times, Zoro pointed out dryly to the couple, who looked at each other as if trying to think of the answer. I think we got them all, and most of the deck and railings, Luffy said, thinking about it, but Ammon frowned for a moment longer. We haven't done it up against the mast or up there by the sails though, Ammon said, realizing that and making Luffy look at her and grin. Now I know what we'll be doing after we're done here. Good thing Ella and Nami are watching over Pix for us, Luffy said, making Ammon grin back and nod her head. Just remember to be gentler this time. You were so rough last night that I could barely walk this morning for at least a good 2 or 3 hours. I enjoyed breakfast in bed, however, Ammon said, making Luffy snicker slightly as he held her close. You were the one who kept begging for me to go faster and harder. I always obey my queen's commands, Luffy pointed out, earning a slight blush and playful smack to the chest from his wife. Do you two have no shame? Ms. Wednesday asked, her face nearly an atomic red color while most of the men had passed out with nosebleeds. This coming from the slutty stripper wannabe. At least when I dress up like a pole dancer, the only one who sees me is my husband. You're dressed like that for the whole world to see, Ammon said, completely flat and making Luffy frown and look at the outfit Vivi was wearing and then look at his wife. That kind of dress would look perfect on you, for my eyes only of course, Luffy said after a few seconds thought and making Mr. 9 look confused. Don't you mean that she would look perfect in the dress? He asked, looking at Luffy, who gave him a look that said that the bat wielder was the stupidest person Luffy had ever met. No, the dress would look perfect on her. She already looks perfect in everything and nothing, Luffy said, causing Ms. Wednesday to resist the urge to coo slightly at the romantic thing he had said, while Ammon blushes a bit and kisses Luffy hard on the mouth. Keep that up and we'll deal with both locations tonight, and I'll even wear one of your favorites, Ammon said, causing Luffy to grin at her again and press a kiss to her cheek. Everything is my favorite as long as it's on you, Luffy said honestly and sincerely, making even Ms. Monday agree that yes, it was sweet and cute. The red one, Ammon said, making Luffy pause and think about it for a second before his face lit up happily. Do we have enough whipped cream and chocolate or cherries for that one? Luffy asked, and instantly everyone was bright red in the face again while Ammon grinned at him. I stocked up on our special supplies at Logtown, Ammon assured her husband, who pulled her into a passionate kiss that quickly devolved into a makeout session usually invoked by horny teenagers. Oh, I love birds. There's still bounty hunters after our heads, you know, Zoro asked, but he was more amused than annoyed. The reactions of the bounty hunters were fucking epic. Besides, he could take them all down in just a few seconds by himself, so it wasn't like his king and queen needed to even get involved. Thank you for reminding me, Zoro. Can you wait a minute so that I can take them apart? Shuro is hungry for blood, Ammon said, pulling away from Luffy, who grinned widely at her and kissed her head. That's fine. Try to leave the numbered ones alive. I know how excited you get when fighting and spilling blood. Besides, it's hot watching you fight. Luffy agreed easily, earning another quick kiss from his wife, who tightened her grip on her sword. You are definitely getting lucky again after this is all over, Ammon said with a wink before she vanished and appeared down amongst the bounty hunters, much to their shock at her speed. A single swipe of her long blade had cut down most of them in the span of a few seconds. Are you two trying to make sure she's having twins or something? Zoro asked, raising an eyebrow at his captain. He and his wife were much raunchier than usual recently, and they'd only been together for 2 days since they were all sent back in time. Oh, I'm 80% sure that she's already carrying twins. I think we're working on triplets now. Besides, this isn't as bad as when she was pregnant with Pixie. She was always turned on by the smallest things then, Luffy pointed out, making Zoro's sweat drop when he remembered his queen getting turned on by the most random things when she had been pregnant the first time. All of the crew had walked in on them at least once, and so had some of their enemies or allies. Zoro had been 89% certain that even the Marines had bets going on not just who would be the next person to walk in on the couple, but also where. Not like they cared. The two still went at it even after being walked in on. Fair point. This Valentine's Day. Mr. 5, did you come to help us? Mr. 9 asked, and earning a scoff and laugh from the pair, who proceeded to explain that someone had found out the boss's identity, and that they were sent to dispatch of the threat and mole in their organization, Princess Vivi of Alabasta, otherwise known as Miss Wednesday. So the slutty stripper is actually a princess? Ammon asked, making the bounty hunters remember that the pirates were there. Vivi just looked torn between angry and embarrassed at the slutty stripper title given to her. Her bodyguard looked furious on her behalf. This doesn't concern you pirates. You'll stay out of our way if you know what's good for you. Mr. 5 tried to threaten them, and making the 3 pirates just look at each other. Does he think he's scary? Ammon asked her husband, who snorted slightly and grinned at his wife, who had blood splattered on her body from the cannon fodder that she had slaughtered. Should we tell him that we've met flowers and trees that are tougher and scarier than him? Luffy asked right back, causing Mr. 5 to glare darkly and stick his finger up his nose, making Ammon scrunch up her own nose. Ugh, I'm glad I broke you of that disgusting habit before we got married, Ammon said to her husband, and none of them looked bothered by the booger he was aiming in their direction. So since he's threatening us, can we kick his ass before you and I go off for our fun? Luffy asked, looking at his wife, who grinned back at him. Do it quick and we can try for more than just triplets. Ammon agreed, making Luffy grin wider while Zoro face-palmed and Miss Wednesday blushed slightly at how shameless the two were. I'll be done in just a few seconds, minute or two at the most, Luffy said, kissing Ammon's cheek and jumping down from the roof to land in between the 2 bounty hunters and the royals. HMPH, getting in our way is stupid, Miss Valentine said, floating up into the air while Mr. 5 got ready to launch his boogie as Sanji and Brook appeared from nowhere and guided the princess and her guard away. Fancy cannon, Mr. 5 said, flicking the exploding boogie, and Luffy just used Tekai and armament haki to make it feel like nothing more than a gust of wind. Not that the 2 bounty hunters knew that. And you said I was stupid. That was pretty dumb, Luffy said, pulling a face at Mr. 5 as the dust cleared to show Luffy completely unharmed. Not even his pants were ruffled. Kill Otine, Miss Valentine's Day said, dropping down with a 1,000-kilo leg aimed at Luffy's head. Luffy just yawned as he caught the leg with one hand, and the blonde woman whipped down past him to slam into the ground. A flying kick. Is that all? Luffy asked, looking bored and disappointed that they weren't as strong as he thought they were. How the hell are you holding 1,000 kilos in one hand? Mr. 5 said, with his composure shot as he gaped at the straw hat-wearing man who blinked at him. What do you think this is heavy? Luffy asked, as if he wasn't speaking about much. Only 20 pounds or so at the most, as he blinked at the booger man. I love watching him get like this. Ammon could be heard sighing happily from the rooftop as she saw her husband bear down on his enemies, and he didn't even realize how imposing he must be to them. We can tell. We've walked in on you, showing him just how much you enjoy it more times than we care to count, Zoro said dryly, and causing Ammon to shrug slightly. So what do you think we should do with them? They could hurt Mary or Pixie if we leave them here. Luffy called up to his wife and first mate, who both tensed at this. The amount of killing intent they put out made the two shiver in terror, and Mr. 5 to nearly piss himself. Well, if they're a threat to our daughter, then we can just send them back to their boss in itty-bitty pieces, Ammon said, her eyes narrowed as she reached for her sword again, having sheathed it after killing the fodder. They got bounties on their heads. We can turn him over to the Marines for that and use the money to help keep Sunny supplied and maybe buy a few toys for the princess, Zoro said, noting that and making the couple blink at him before they both looked at each other. Pixie has been eyeing my sword when I'm training recently. Maybe getting her a wooden one to start training with and disguising it as playing would be a good idea. But with the bounties on our heads we wouldn't be able to hand in these two ourselves. Ammon pointed out and making Luffy nod at that. Yeah, they'd go after us cause we've got higher bounties. Nami and Usopp and Brook and the new ones don't have bounties yet. They can hand them in for us. Luffy pointed out, earning nods from the other two as he then focused his haki on the two and knocked them both out easily. Looks like Pixie can start her training to be a swordswoman sooner than we thought, Ammon said with a smile as Luffy tied the two up with some rope he found nearby. It was probably meant to be used to tie up pirates for the bounty hunters to turn in, so this was karma. Yeah, but no heavy training for you for a while, Luffy reminded her as he lifted the two over his shoulders, heedless of the fact that Ms. Valentine weighed roughly 1,000 kilos still. I know the drill. I learned my lesson the first time, Ammon said, although she didn't sound too annoyed. She knew he was just worried about her and their children. That's my good girl, Luffy said, appearing beside her and handing the two bounties over to Zoro as he grabbed Ammon's chin and made her look him in the eye. She blushed brightly at the words he said and lowered her eyes submissively, knowing well and good what him saying those words meant. You'll remember to be gentle, right? Ammon whispered, making Luffy grin at her and press his lips to her forehead. Of course I will, my queen. Just as gentle as you wanted, Luffy promised, making Ammon blush and look down, knowing that she often begged him to take her harder or faster. She knew she liked it rough and just this side of painful, and she knew that he knew it. We have to be gentle now, Ammon said softly as her hand dropped to her belly, causing Luffy's face to soften as his hand covered her own. No matter what you say or how much you beg, I'll be gentle. We aren't letting anything happen to these little ones, Luffy said, making Ammon smile thankfully up at him for that. She wanted to be better than her mother. She wanted to shower her children in love and affection and make sure they knew that she loved them with all her heart no matter what. Even from the first minute she learned of them growing within her, she loved them so much it hurt. Her babies, her beautiful little children. I'll cut down anyone who tries quickly, Ammon said, and it really spoke a lot when the infamous slow torturous killer would strike someone down quickly. Only if you get there before I kill him, Luffy said, nuzzling her neck near her shoulder and placing kisses there which distracted her since that was one of her very sensitive spots. You know ... we can use the mast and sails anytime ... what say we make some unique memories here? Ammon asked, her brain quickly switching over to a different mindset as she blushed at his attention to that particular soft spot. Right here, on the roof, Luffy asked, raising an eyebrow at his wife while Zoro slammed his palm into his forehead with near concussive force before quickly booking it back to the ship. Why not? As soon as we get back to Whole Cake Island ... we're doing it on my mother's throne, Ammon said, and that made Luffy grin and snicker slightly. Should we make her watch too? Luffy asked, causing Ammon to tilt her head before she turned and pinned him to the roof. We'll decide when we get there. For now I believe we've done enough thinking, Ammon said as she began to ground against him, causing him to laugh as he flipped them over, gently settling her on the rooftop. I agree. You look perfect as usual though, bathed in blood and moonlight. I'm going to make you scream my name, Luffy said, kissing her hard as he began to undress her, kissing every inch of skin he uncovered. She shivered at the promise in his words. I'm not going to make it easy, Ammon warned with a spark of playfulness and eagerness in her eyes. She knew he would go through with it. She always ended up screaming his name to the heavens when he tried. That didn't mean she couldn't make him work for it, however. I'd expect nothing less. After that there wasn't much more talking involved as the two got busy. The rest of the conscious and alive people in town and around the island were blushing brightly at how loud Ammon was moaning and screaming her husband's name. They all thanked God that Pixie could sleep through anything and felt jealous that they couldn't do the same except for Zoro and Brancha, who weren't fazed as they kept an eye on the prisoners. Vivi buried her bright red face in her hands aboard the ship and wondered just what kind of people she was asking help from to get back to her home and stop Crocodile. How did she sink this low? Vice Admiral Brancha, the Marine captain that came to pick up the bounties, quickly saluted the red-haired woman who just snorted and pinned him with a glare. The rest of the Marines immediately saluted as well and looked terrified. At ease. I'm not a Marine anymore, Brancha said, sneering, since she recognized a few of the Marines as ones that cheered when she was sold to the dragon. They didn't like her being in charge over them simply because of her freaky powers in their minds, since most were from the East Blue. I'm here to turn over these two for the bounties, Brancha said, not wasting time as she hooked a thumb at the two still knocked out Baroque Works agents who were quickly identified by the terrified Marines. That's 30 million for the woman and 40 million for the man. Your total is 70 million berry. Haven't lost your touch, have you? One of the lieutenants that had actually respected the woman said with a grin as he quickly searched the stack of bounty posters for the two. So you left the Marines to become a bounty hunter? One particularly cocky-looking lieutenant asked, sneering at Brancha, who favored him with a completely blank expression. I was sold by the Marines to the dragons because of my powers. A pirate raided the slave ship and freed me. I refused to join the crew and they gave me a boat and some supplies to live off of until I made it to some other island, Brancha said, and she wasn't technically lying. Ammon had freed her and offered her a spot on Big Mom's crew, but she didn't want to work for Big Mom. She wanted to work for Ammon, who gave her a place to stay and a boat and helped her get settled into her temporary home on Nuts Island. Of course, since cocky rookies like you are making it to being a lieutenant, then it's a good thing I'm not coming back. I'd knock you down to petty officer in a heartbeat, Brancha said, making the man bluster and fluster before a loud moan distracted everyone and made the men blush. Are they still going at it? They've been at it all night, Brancha asked in disbelief and earning a snort from Usopp, who had been with her eyeing the Marines distrustfully. Nami was waiting for them to hand Brancha the bounty money. Then she was going to rob them blind. She was the thief of the crew after all. You think they're bad now? You should have been around before she was pregnant with Pix. They went at it for days at a time. Honestly, none of us were surprised when she ended up pregnant. We were more surprised that she didn't have triplets or more, Usopp said, making more than one Marines blush or get a nosebleed at that information before there was a loud please scream. They're trying for triplets now, Brancha said dryly and not bothered by the scream. She had heard them all night, although usually it was Luffy's name she was screaming. Ammon wasn't going to be able to walk or talk for a while, Brancha was sure. At this point, I think they're going for octuplets, Usopp said just as dryly. Is anyone going to warn them that the little princess should be waking up any minute now? Brancha asked, making Usopp tilt his head slightly as if listening for something. Brooks got him. Hopefully they'll actually stop this time, Usopp said with a sweat drop. Wouldn't they when he barges up to them? Brancha asked as 3 petty officers went to fetch the money, not knowing that Nami was silently and invisibly following them. They've literally gone at it like rabbits all night on top of a roof where anyone can see and watch. You think they'll care if one of us approaches? As long as we don't try to touch either of them, they aren't going to care about us walking up. Trust me, pretty much all of us have walked in on them in the most random of places and they never stopped before, Usopp said, and now more than one Marine was trying to stop their bloody noses while the petty officers returned with the money, never noticing Nami throwing bags of berry and bars of gold into the sea where Laboon and the 2 fishermen crew members were waiting to grab them and move them to the boat. Well, since she stopped screaming, moaning, and begging him to go faster or rougher, I think they stopped, Brancha said, only for another pleasured cry to pierce the air and making her eyebrow twitch. Now I think they stopped, Usopp said, amused as Nami gave the signal that she was done, sneaking back off the boat and tapping Usopp and Brancha on their shoulders. Whatever, we got the bounties, so let's hurry up and get back to the boss. Anyone know where we can get a small training sword for the little princess? Brancha asked, hefting the bags up easily and carrying them over one shoulder, causing the Marines to look horrified and nervous since it took 3 petty officers to carry it. She didn't make Vice Admiral level for her pretty face, or her powers really, since she didn't get them until she was a Rear Admiral. Are we really going to buy a 3-year-old a wooden sword? Usopp asked with a small sweat drop, but he wasn't surprised, not with who exactly the girl's parents were, not to mention most of her aunts and uncles. Well, I'd suggest a dull sword, but she has to get used to the weight of wooden ones first. She's still little, so she'll grow into a bigger and heavier one soon, Brancha said, struggling and making Usopp give her a flat look as they walked away, and the Marines quickly booked it. They wouldn't realize they had been robbed for a while yet, but better safe than sorry to get away from them now. Where's Mommy and Daddy? Pixie was asking when they got back to the boat. We're right here, Princess, Luffy said, jumping onto the boat with Ammon looking tired but pleased in his arms. Their outfits were messed up. Their hair was in a mess, and there was a distinct scent from the 2 of them, but Pixie didn't notice. Baby sister? Pixie asked, looking at her mother's stomach as Luffy settled her into a lawn chair while Nami began to steer them away from the islands through the fog. Your baby brother or sister is just fine, sweetheart. They're still safely inside of Mommy where they're warm and happy, Ammon said, rubbing her stomach as Pixie crawled up into her lap and placed her ear to her mother's belly. Can't hear? Pixie asked, frowning cutely at her mother's baby bump. That's because I'm not far enough along for them to kick yet. Just wait a few more weeks and you can feel them kick, Ammon said just as they were getting out of the fog. So it wasn't all just a dream? A familiar voice asked from the top railing, and earning startled looks from the others while Luff just laughed. Viz all Sunday, Vivi said, alarmed and scared at the sight of the known face of Baroque Works. Robin, Luffy said, happily waving at the archaeologist, who gave a fond smile. You know Ms. All Sunday? Vivi asked, her brain about ready to fry at that knowledge. Course, she's our spy, Luffy said, blinking at Vivi, who was gaping now in disbelief. She just buried her face in her hands and silently gave up when there was a loud squeal from Pixie, who rushed up and glomped the woman's leg, earning a fond laugh from the archaeologist assassin. Auntie Robin, shall I go ahead onto Alabasta and take care of everything? I can take the princess with me and everything will be finished before you all get there, Robin offered with a smile towards Luffy, who looked at her and tilted his head slightly to the side as she handed Nami an eternal pose to Alabasta. Well, Vivi, do you want to go with Robin while she takes down the old Sandman, or travel with us while she takes him down? Luffy asked, looking at the blue-haired princess. Vivi looked torn. On one hand, she wanted to get to her country as quickly as possible, but on the other, she didn't really trust Ms. All Sunday. Do you really think she can defeat a warlord on her own? Vivi asked, looking at Luffy after a moment and making Robin frown almost as if she were insulted. Please don't insult me, princess. I can defeat at least 2 or 3 warlords on my own, Robin said, not sounding cocky or arrogant at all. She had trained very hard to be able to help and protect her captain after all. She had earned the King's Assassin ink on her stomach, thank you, Auntie Robin Strong. Pixie piped up, earning a fond smile and a pat on the head from the archaeologist. Vivi still wasn't sure and was in fact greatly distrustful of the woman who she had shadowed to learn Crocodile's identity. I think I would like to remain here aboard the ship with the straw hats, Vivi said, her eyes distrustful as she looked at Robin, who couldn't fault the princess and instead merely nodded her head in understanding. Orders, Captain, Robin asked, looking for her captain's instruction on how to deal with Crocodile. Take Crocodile out and make sure you can expose him, but don't kill him. Might need his help for something later. See if you can convert the rest of Baroque Works into a sort of special forces that works for Alabasta as a line of defense, Luffy said after a moment of thinking about it and earning a smile and nod from Robin. Of course, Captain, with your permission, Robin asked, bowing her head and causing him to stretch up and kiss her forehead. A blessing for safe travels. Don't get hurt, Luffy said, earning a nod from the archaeologist while Pixie pouted as she attached herself to Robin's leg. Auntie Robin, Pixie asked, looking up at Robin, who picked her up easily and kissed the little girl's head. Auntie Robin has to go follow orders, little princess. I'll see you in a few days, and when you see me again I'll have a present for you. How's that sound? Robin asked, earning a blink and then a wide grin from the little girl, showing that Pixie had indeed inherited her father's smile. Safe, Pixie said, hugging her aunt's neck one last time before she was set back down with another kiss to the head and earning a small wink from the archaeologist. As my princess commands. Now watch this, Robin said, smiling at the girl before Robin dashed to the railing, jumped over it and did a backflip before landing on her feet, standing on top of a large turtle with a seat of sorts attached. Cool, Pixie cheered, rushing to the railing as well and having stars in her eyes while the rest of the veteran members of the crew held up scorecards. 7s or 8s all around. It would have been higher if she had used her wings, but she didn't want to tip her hand in front of the newcomers too much. Au revoir for now, Robin said with a showman's bow as the turtle began swimming off. Daddy Turtle, Pixie said, wide-eyed and beaming and causing her father to laugh. I see the turtle, princess. Don't forget that we have a really large whale though. I'm sure if you ask nicely, Laboon would be happy to let you ride on his head for a while, Luffy said, picking his daughter up and tossing her in the air a bit before catching her easily. Really? Pixie asked, her eyes going even wider and then her head twisted to look at her mother. Can I, Mama? Pixie asked eagerly and earning a small frown from her mother, who glanced at the fishmen for a second. Very well, but take Daja and Jalan with you in case you fall into the water, Ammon said, making her daughter squeal and rush over to the 2 fishmen who had looked up from what they were doing when they heard their names. I'll call Laboon up, Luffy said, walking to the railing and whistling slightly, causing there to be an answering whistle that sounded more like a roar as the large whale raised its head above the seawater to look up at Luffy. Hey Laboon, do you mind if Pixie rides on your head? Luffy asked, grinning at the whale, who blinked and then seemed to grin. There was a softer whistling sound from the whale that caused Luffy to grin. Thanks, Laboon. Okay, princess. Laboon says it's fine with him. Make sure you stay where we can see you and listen to Daja and Jalan, okay? Luffy asked, hugging his daughter, who squealed happily and hugged him back, nodding her head rapidly in agreement. You two will keep my daughter safe, won't you? Ammon asked, her voice a bit darker than normal as she stared at the 2 fishmen who bowed to her. Of course, mistress. We'll keep the little miss safe and out of the water, Daja said, earning a thankful smile from the swordswoman. Uncle Daja, Uncle Jalan, come on, please. Pixie raced over to the 2 and grabbed their hands, trying to tug them to the boat and actually succeeding a little bit, much to their surprise. The rest of the crew merely looked surprised by how she addressed them. Looks like our daughter's adopting 2 new uncles, Luffy pointed out to Amande as Sanji brought her a baby healthy shake made of blueberries since she could no longer stand strawberries. And apparently she couldn't stand chicken either, which had been quickly taken down to Crocus before it could make her sick. And 3 new aunts, not counting Vivi, Ammon pointed out in return as she patted Sanji's arm in a gesture of wordless thanks, earning a grin from the cook, who then danced off to give the rest of the women their drinks as well. She ignored the looks of disbelief on the newcomers' faces at the sight of Sanji doing a double backflip onto the top of the whale's head to hand Pixie her drink on bended knee before using Skywalk to jump back up onto the ship, without spilling a single drop. What kind of crew did I end up joining? Vivi asked in disbelief and earning a smile from Nami. A crew where we're all family and we help one another achieve our dreams and protect each other from everyone and everything else, Nami said without missing a beat before she walked over to Vivi ... and pulled her into a hug. The captain agreed to help you and even let you come aboard the Mary instead of riding in the other boat, "You're one of us, Vivi," Nami said, and very purposefully did not mention that Vivi had been one of theirs for years back in the last go-round. Vivi had become queen and had publicly swore fealty to Luffy, much like Sanji's sister Ryuju had after Chopper and Law got rid of her programming that her father had put on her and her brothers. Needless to say that when the Marines tried going after the Kingdom of Alabasta while the other 11 divisions of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet had beat them down with impressive brutality, the sounds of the Marines' horror and shock at the fact that the royal family of Dressrosa, the royal Merman family, and the Shogun of Wano and all its samurai and ninja were under the direct command of Straw Hat Luffy. Nami was pretty sure the screams of horror were heard all the way to Whole Cake Island. "Should we skip Little Garden and go straight to Drumore?" Nami trailed off, looking at Luffy, who blinked for a moment and looked at the others. "I do want to meet Droggy and Broggy again, but I don't want anyone getting sick," Luffy said, looking worriedly at Nami and Ammon and glancing at the railing where he could hear his daughter laughing as she tried to catch the fish jumping out near Laboon. He especially didn't want Pixie or Ammon getting the same sickness Nami had last time. There was no telling what the 5-day fever would do to his little girl or to his pregnant wife. "But if we don't go, then that wax guy would end up killing them," Zoro said, noting that and making Luffy bit his lip as he realized that as well. "Plus, this would be a good time to see just how strong the newcomers are." Usopp added that and making Luffy nod his head. That was true. They did need to know what the new members of the crew were capable of. "Just give us an order and we'll prove ourselves," Branches said, making Luffy glance at her before looking at Ammon, who nodded her head. "All right, Usopp, Sanji, take the new blood to Little Garden for a test of their skills and capabilities. Don't interfere unless they're going to be really hurt or die." "Brancha." Luffy turned to look at the former Marine, who straightened up as he addressed her. "Yes, sir," Brancha asked, nearly at attention as she awaited her orders. "There are 2 giants on the island. They've been dueling each other for over 100 years. Also on the island are more of those bounty hunter types we saw on Whiskey Peak. But these 2 are stronger. Instead of Mr. 5, there's a Mr. 3. Luffy began, and Brancha wondered for one moment how he knew all of this without being on the island itself. But she didn't say anything just yet. "First, leave the giants alone. Make friends with them if you want, but don't try to kill them or attack them. Second, if able, then knock out the bounty hunters and bring them back to the boat. Third, don't get bitten by anything. There's no telling what kind of diseases are on this island, and we still have to pick our doctor up from Drum Island. Do you understand all that?" Luffy asked, frowning seriously and making Brancha stand at attention now. "Yes, sir," Brancha said, actually saluting and making Luffy's sweat drop. "Hey, easy there. We're pirates, not Marines. No need to be so formal," Luffy said, while Ammon was snickering slightly at the befuddled look on her husband's face at the former Marine's action. "Anyways, you'll mainly be in charge of the other 4. Sanji and Usopp will be watching out to make sure there's nothing you guys can't handle, but this will be more of a test to see what you and the new 4 can do. So go wild," Luffy said before he looked over to the rest of the crew. "Nami, you mind getting Pixie back up here? I don't want her so close to the water without someone with her," Luffy asked, making the navigator nod silently and jump over the railing to grab the small snake neck. "Danja, Jalon, Ella, Selsa, come here, will ya?" Luffy called for the other 4 newcomers, who appeared in front of him almost immediately. "You 4 will be going with Brancha to Little Garden as both an assignment and a training exercise. She'll be in charge of you 4 and explain the orders and all on the way there. Sanji and Usopp will be going along as well in case you guys run into anything you can't handle, but they won't interfere too much," Luffy explained, earning nods from each of them while Nami appeared back on the railing with Pixie in her arms, playing with Nami's baton in its smaller form. "While we're there, we can stock up on some exotic meats. We got more people to cook for now, so I'll have to make sure we have plenty," Sanji said, lighting a new cigarette and making sure he stood a safe distance from Pixie and Ammon when he did so. Ammon gave up smoking when she learned she was pregnant and refused to be near Sanji if he was smoking while carrying Pixie, and just after Pixie was born too. Sanji knew better than to smoke near his queen and princess, if he wanted to stay in one piece at least. "That sounds great," Luffy said, grinning and dropping his serious captain act as he grinned at his cook, who sighed but smiled and prepared lunchboxes for everyone. "We'll leave in 6 minutes. We'll be taking the second boat since we don't need any possible bugs or things biting Pixie or Ammon at the moment," Usopp said, glancing at his princess and queen, worried, remembering how bad off Nami had been last time. "Should we take Vivi with us, Captain? She would probably feel safer if she knows just what some of our members are capable of," Brancha asked, looking from the blue-haired princess to the straw hat-wearing boy who had sat on the deck by his wife's chair to play with Pixie. Besides seeing one woman completely slaughter over 100 bounty hunters, and then seeing one man easily take down 2 opponents far outside of my league, Vivi asked dryly as she looked at the Marine woman, who shrugged her shoulders. "That's the mistress and captain. They're both on a whole different level from us, a much higher level, considering we're new. And the way he's sending one of the cowards of the crew to watch over us, that implies that even the sniper is much stronger than we are." If even us newcomers are able to impress you with our strength and abilities, then you'll feel much safer around us in the monster crew," Brancha said with a shrug, knowing that she would never be able to beat Zoro in a fight, much less Luffy or Ammon. "Sure, Vivi, why don't you go see what they're like? Who knows, you might end up learning some new tricks and getting stronger yourself," Luffy said with a grin, and making Vivi slowly nod at that. She would like to get stronger and be able to stand on her own 2 feet. "Very well, I'll be in your care," Vivi said, bowing slightly to Brancha, who scratched the back of her neck. "No need for the bowing and all. Like the captain said, we're pirates, and Nami-san did say that you were one of us now," Brancha said, earning a slow blink and then a nod from Vivi. "Come on, Karu. We're going to be going with them for a while," Vivi said to her duck, who quacked and leapt onto the second boat without waiting for his mistress. "Daddy, twirly stick," Pixie said, spinning the baton she got from Nami as much as she could and claiming her father's attention as half the crew got ready to leave for the prehistoric island. "Do you need this back, Nami?" Luffy asked, glancing up at his navigator, who grinned at him. "No, she can keep it. Turns out when we were sent back, anything we were holding was sent back with us unless it belonged to something else before we got it. I still have my witch baton," Nami said, making the others nod, having realized that aside from Zoro they all had their weapons from when they landed on Raftal as well. "What do you say to Auntie Nami, princess?" Luffy asked, causing his daughter to beam up at the orange-haired woman. "Thank you," Pixie chirped, earning a soft smile from the navigator as the other boat left towards Little Garden while Zoro threw the anchor overboard to stop the Mary. "I'll have to call my mother again in a little while," Ammon said, sighing heavily as she realized she should go ahead and call her mother while she was thinking about it, and they had a moment of peace. "I'll get the snail for you, but you should wait a few more seconds," Luffy said, kissing Ammon's cheek and quickly fetching the snail from their room. Why, Ammon was cut off by a loud startled shriek from the island. "Maybe I should have told them the island's full of dinosaurs," Luffy asked with an impish grin on his face as Pixie wandered over to the napping Zoro to crawl all over him again. He and Chopper were her favorite playmates aside from her daddy and mommy after all. "You're horrible," Ammon said with a grin. The rest of the crew snorted at Luffy's next words. It wasn't like he was wrong after all. He had the mark on his back to prove it for all to see after all, even if most didn't seem to notice it at first. "I'm a pirate, the Pirate King at that. Mama, it's Amande," Ammon said on the snail as soon as her mother answered it. "Ah, Amande, how are you?" Big Mom asked, grinning as she answered the snail. "I am fine, Mama. We are stopping at Little Garden at the moment for the new members to get some training, and so I thought I would go ahead and call you," Ammon said, earning a hum from her mother. "I see. And the status of any grandchildren?" Big Mom asked while Luffy distracted Pixie by balancing the baton on his nose, causing his daughter to clap and giggle on the other side of the ship. "My belly will be full of children by the next time we appear in the papers. If I am not swollen when we arrive at Tottoland, then I will be soon after. My husband has professed a desire for many children to call our own," Ammon said, rubbing her stomach, which was already swollen slightly, but she wasn't going to tell her mother that. "That is good. That means that you will have many powerful babies soon," Big Mom said with an unsettling grin on her face as she pictured the results of breeding her third daughter, and arguably the strongest in a contest of pure strength, with a man who had over 1 billion berry on his head and was just starting out. "Yes, Mama. Lots of happy and healthy little ones," Ammon said, her voice and eyes softening as she glanced over at her daughter, who was crawling all over Zoro again while the apparently asleep swordsman led her with a small smile on his face that showed he was fully awake. "Good. How long before you arrive at Whole Cake Island?" Big Mom asked, causing Ammon to pause and frown for a second. "I'm not quite sure, actually. My husband has professed a need to stop at several islands and pick up his crewmates who had scattered for training and personal reason," Ammon said, sticking as close to the truth as she could without revealing anything important. "I see." Big Mom stopped for a minute and seemed to think of something before she nodded. "All right, call me once every 2 months, and let me know when you're getting close to Tottoland or when your children are born. Whichever happens first. I expect a good many grandchildren from you, Ammon, and that you won't be slacking in your sword skills while away from home or carrying a child," Big Mom said, earning a nod from her daughter. "Don't worry, Mama. I'm sure I'll have quite the amount of children by the time we arrive there, and my skills with the blade will be as sharp as ever, if not more so. I won't let anyone or anything hurt my children," Ammon said, her voice dark and firm at the end. She wouldn't even let her mother hurt her babies. "What's that noise?" Big Mom asked, distracted, when Brook pulled out his violin and began playing Bink's Sake, which earned loud cheers from the crew present as they all began to sing aside from Ammon, who laughed a bit. The musician of the crew just started a song that is well liked by the entire crew. They're all singing along. "For such high bounties they're quite the cheerful bunch," Ammon said with a small laugh as she heard her daughter singing. Her voice was high-pitched now and sounded like her father's ... but Ammon was sure that her little girl would become a much better singer once she reached puberty. "Any children born into this lively bunch and to my husband ... they will be very strong and loved. He's going to be a wonderful father," Ammon said, her voice soft as she watched her husband dance with their daughter. Mainly he held her hands and laughed as she led him into a wild dance. Do they know of your relation to me yet? Big Mom asked, ignoring how soft her daughter's voice was. Her daughter was trying to become a mother for what she thought was the first time. She'd let a little bit of softness slide for the moment. I highly doubt it. I haven't said anything. And they're all from one of the blues aside from the 5 that I brought with me. If they do know, they've given me no indication of it or show no sign of caring. Ammon said, and technically that wasn't a lie. Luffy and his crew didn't give a single rat's ass about who her mother was. Not when Luffy could kick her mother's fat ass almost with ease at this point. Good. Without another word, Big Mom hung up on her daughter, who frowned at the snail before putting it back down and letting the poor thing sleep some more. Mama, read? Pixie asked, rushing over to her mother with a book in her hands, causing her mother to smile down at her and pick her up to settle her on the chair. It's almost your nap time. Why don't we both take a nap, sweetheart? Ammon asked, taking the book and letting her daughter cuddle into her side. Mommy tired? Pixie asked, blinking up at her mother and earning a small smile and yawn. With how much she and Luffy went at it all night, I bet she is. Usopp muttered to Brook, who laughed, only for both of them to get smacked upside the head by Zoro. Yes, Mommy is tired, sweetheart. I didn't sleep much last night and the baby is making me more tired than usual. Ammon ignored the sniper, who was now whining at the swordsman as she cuddled her daughter, who quickly leaned over mother's stomach. Be good, baby brother. Don't make Mommy tired or sick, Pixie said to her mother's stomach, causing the crew to smile fondly at her while Ammon gave a small laugh and pulled her daughter up to rest her head on Ammon's shoulder. Remember, the baby could still be a girl, Ammon said, pressing a kiss to her daughter's head. Could even be 2 or 3, Luffy said with a grin and earning a snort from Ammon. Considering how much triplets and more runs in the family, I wouldn't be surprised, Ammon said with a smile towards her husband, who relaxed next to the chair, laying on the grass and putting his hat on his daughter's head to shield her from the sun. Now let's have a story and then we'll take a nap together, okay, Pixie? Ammon asked, looking back to her daughter, who nodded happily and tried to hide her yawn. You two keep it down. You disturb our king, queen, and princess's rest. Zoro was in protective guard dog mode as he glared the other 2 members of the crew present into being quiet before settling against the mast within 10 feet of his captain for a nap himself. Usopp just sweat dropped a bit at the swordman's antics, the pirate hunter becoming very protective of his king and queen and princess, especially the prince and the queen when she was carrying a new prince or princess. Brook just gave a silent nod of agreement with Usopp's muttered statement. Geez, Zoro's almost as overprotective as Luffy. I see you guys brought back 1 extra, Luffy said without even opening his eyes as the little garden training group came back. Amande and Pixie snuggled together, sleeping peacefully in the chair next to him. I want to adopt her, Sanji said seriously as he glanced at the small girl by his side. Ms. Golden Week of Baroque Works. Mr. 3 was tied up and being taken to the brig right now, and the giants were waving goodbye happily. Oh? Luffy asked, cracking open one eye to look at his cook and the small painter that was halfway hidden behind the cook's legs. She was ... Her parents trained her as an assassin, Sanji said, causing Zoro to crack open an eye as well, but remained silent while Luffy's eyes narrowed a bit at that. The original crew knew about Sanji's past and what his father and brothers had done to him. Luffy could understand why his cook was trying to save this child. You'll be responsible for her training and most of her safety. Amma doesn't need much more stress in her condition, Luffy said after a moment of silence as he glanced over at his wife and his eye softened. The new baby was making her very tired and sicker than normal. His instincts and haki told him she'd be fine, and so would the baby, but he still worried. Thank you, Captain, Sanji said with a grin as he looked down at Golden Week, who looked surprised but happy that she could stay. Give the girl a real name too if she doesn't have one, or at least help her pick one. She deserves to have her own name, Luffy said, causing Sanji to nod his head. He already had the perfect name in mind. How does Sora sound, little one? Sanji asked, causing the girl to blink for a few seconds before slowly nodding her head. Sora ... sky ... I like it. It sounds ... free. The newly dubbed Sora said, earning smiles from the crew, and Luffy caught a small widening of his wife's smile to show that she was awake. You already know how to kill, so I'll mainly be teaching you how to cook and protect, Sanji said as he looked at his new daughter, who blinked again. Only a minute change of her expression showing her feelings. Protect? Sora questioned, earning a nod from Sanji. Right. I'll be teaching you how to protect yourself and others too. How to protect those who can't protect themselves, Sanji said, smiling and causing Sora to frown. Everyone here can protect themselves, however, Sora said, glancing at the group that had defeated Mr. 3 and her with laughable ease. Not everyone. The little princess can't yet, and the queen is a bit more vulnerable than normal right now, Sanji said, pointing towards Amande and Pixie, one of whom was still asleep. Princess? Queen? Sora asked, although her eyes seemed to lit up at the sight of Pixie. She liked little kids. They always liked her art and were happy to have tea with her and play a few games with her. Our captain is the Pirate King, His wife is the pirate queen and their daughter is the pirate princess, Sanji explained as he guided Sora closer quietly. Pixie here is 3 years old, and the queen is going to have another baby soon. We have to keep them safe right now since there are plenty of people who'd hurt them, Sanji said quietly so that they didn't wake the two up. He already noticed that his queen was awake, but he didn't give any sign of it. Protect ... the little princess, Sora said softly as she stared at the little girl who was sleeping peacefully curled up against her mother with a happy little smile on her face. A happy smile that Sora never had on her own face even when she had been that little. She had been training in her hypnotism and different ways to kill using her paints by the time she was 2. She never curled up with her mother and napped so peacefully like this smiling little girl. I want to protect her smile, Sora said finally as she looked up at Sanji, who smiled back at her and patted her head. I'll start training you and teaching you how to cook in the morning, Sanji promised, making Sora nod her head before they backed away from the sleeping duo, and Sanji looked back at Luffy. The new bloods didn't do half bad. Got a good couple of dinosaurs that we can eat later, a couple of rare spices and herbs, and they took down Waxy with ease. They have at least the basics of the main 2 hackies down, and Braca Swan shows a small bit of the conquerors. Ella Swan is the best with observation. She's able to see about 3 or 4 seconds into the future, but since she's a dagger fighter she needs to work more on her armament. Sanji began seriously as he lit another cigarette. Luffy didn't open his eyes and just hummed slightly to show that he was listening. Jalon can't eat whales, but everything else is fair game. His armament is decent but nothing to brag about, and his observation definitely needs work since he can only barely sense danger coming at him. Needs a backup weapon in case his karate and hands aren't enough. Sanji continued on while the new bloods listened with open minds on ideas of improvements. Salsa Swan's good at sneaking around with her devil fruit. You can barely tell she isn't a normal snake when she uses the full form. With her penchant for thrown weapons and sneaking, however, she needs to definitely work on her observation and armament some more. Not the strongest at straight combat, but she can sneak up and disable the enemies like Robin can, only she uses either her fangs or her weapons, Sanji said, nodding towards the snake fruit user, who smiled slightly. Daja can't eat sharks, so we'll have to cut back on them, but he's pretty good with his hands and his axe. He's adept at both forms of haki but needs more improvement at armament given his skill set. Sanji nodded towards Daja now, who grinned. Brancha Swan's the best of the lot with armament, and she's decent with both a sword and a gun. Prefers to use her devil fruit but doesn't rely on it like some others do. Has signs of conqueror's haki, but it isn't very strong. She's better as a secondary leader than as a straight-up leader. She could do with a little more observation practice, but overall out of the lot she's the one who needs the least amount of improvement. Increasing her strength is about the only thing I can think of for her to do. She's already faster than the others. Honestly, she's probably a shoo-in for making the monster trio into a monster quad, Sanji said with a grin and making Luffy crack open an eye, intrigued at that. So she's on our level, Luffy asked, referring to himself, Zoro, and Sanji. Closer to it than everyone but the queen, Sanji agreed with a nod. Interesting, Luffy said, turning to look at Brancha out of the corner of his eye and causing Ammon to open her eyes and frown in jealousy. I'll do my best, Captain, Brancha said, smiling and blushing slightly at what was very high praise, being on the same level of the Billionberry duo. I know you will, Luffy said with his usual wide cheerful grin, causing her to blush brighter slightly. Mine, Ammon hissed slightly as she opened her eyes in a glare, although she was careful not to wake up her napping toddler. You okay there, love? Luffy asked, immediately moving to his wife's side and keeping his voice low to keep from waking Pixie. I'm fine, but I'm feeling a bit clingy, Ammon said, making Luffy grin at her and wiggle onto the lawn chair beside her, stretching his legs and body out so that she was able to lay her head on his chest. It was her favorite way to sleep usually. You can cling to me all you want. You're my life and soul after all, Luffy said, kissing the top of her head as he wrapped his arms around her while she bit his neck to leave her fang marks on him. She was marking him as hers so that everyone could see and know that he was off the market. Was it a bit excessive for what was just some innocent comments and his usual smile? Yes, maybe a bit, but Ammon was a bit more feral than other snake necks. She was very possessive of her mate, especially when she was carrying a hatchling. Mine, Ammon murmured as she cuddled into him, Pixie moving slightly to cuddle into her mother's back and sighed with a small grumble that was more hiss than words. Yep, Zoro, you got the island eater, Luffy asked, looking over at his swordsman who was already standing with a sword drawn. Got him, Zoro said with a grunt. Good, Luffy said, unbothered as the large fish showed up and Luffy merely laid there with his wife resting her head on his chest over the burnt X mark scar. You're mine, no one else can have you, Ammon reiterated as she gently moved Pixie until the little girl was resting curled up into her mother's stomach and chest and sleeping on top of her father's chest and stomach. Luffy didn't mind her possessive words and actions, not in the least. In fact, he agreed as one hand stretched around her to rest on the noticeable swell of her stomach, and the other rested on top of Pixie to keep his daughter from rolling off of the chair. He whispered his words to her as Zoro finished slashing a hole into the giant fish, earning a small pleased hum from her as she drifted off to sleep again. "You're mine. Mama, have you seen the newspaper today?" Oven asked, immediately looking from the newspaper to his mother and not seeming happy. They were all there for a reason their mother didn't seem to realize yet, aside from those that were on missions and Ammon, who was nowhere near the islands at the moment. "No, anything interesting?" Big Mom asked without looking up from the tea cake in her hand. Apparently the group of servants that Ammon took with her are now a small pirate crew separate from the one whose captain she decided on but considered allied and subservient to it. Not only that, but it seems the person Ammon chose has some high-placed friends. Demon Child Robin is confirmed as a part of his crew, and she took down and exposed the warlord Crocodile and his schemes when he gave her a signal of some sort. Crocodile escaped the Marines holding him and attacked Princess Vivi of Alabasta while Ammon and this Straw Hat Luffy were escorting her to her palace. Straw Hat took Crocodile down with a single backhand that shows he knows haki, and now he and his crew are being praised as the saviors of Alabasta for stopping the civil war. Colette said, reporting that first before wincing when she saw the look on Deifuku's face when he saw the picture in the paper. "Ammon broke one of your laws, Mama." Deifuku snarled angrily and causing all noise at the table to stop immediately. "What?" Big Mom's voice was cold and dark, and her aura was already starting to show without her even meaning to. She is not yet officially married but claims the rookie as her husband, Deifuku said, scowling and making his mother's aura disappear as she blinked a bit. "They're on their way here for the wedding," Big Mom said, rolling her eyes and making Deifuku scowl harder. "The picture clearly shows that she's swelling with child," Deifuku said, earning a startled look from his mother as his siblings winced or looked at the closest paper wide-eyed. "But the law about being untouched," Citron whispered as she stared shocked and horrified at the picture of her obviously pregnant sister in the paper. All of Big Mom's children knew that by their mother's law they were to be pure until they were married. They also knew that if they wanted to break that law, then they'd better tell no one, do it well outside of Tottoland's borders, and damn well make sure that there are no results. She's only met him 2 months ago, and yet she's already at a near 3 or 4 month swell. For her to be showing that much, she must be carrying at least 2 or 3. Compote said, looking at the picture and noting that the swell was much bigger than it should be. "Get me the snail. I need to talk to her about this," Big Mom said, ordering the chess peacekeepers to bring her snail to her. "Is Sister Ammon going to be in trouble?" Inanna asked, looking a bit worried as she frowned up at her mother. Big Mom didn't answer as the snail was brought to her by the servants. "What do you want?" a male's voice asked, sounding annoyed as it answered the snail. There were some sounds in the background that caused a few of her closer siblings to look horrified or disgusted. Wait, Luffy. Which snail was ringing?" Ammon's voice asked breathlessly. "This one," Luffy's voice said, and causing Ammon to pause before she cursed. "Shit, Luffy, that's my mother. Get off of me," Ammon said, and there was a sound of scrambling as the two of them apparently separated from what they were doing. There was a small whine. "Don't worry, we can keep celebrating after the call," Ammon was heard whispering to Luffy, causing her siblings to pull faces at what she was implying. Big Mom just laughed. "Me mama, don't worry, this won't take long. I just want to know about the status of grandchildren since we just saw you in the paper," Big Mom said, making it clear that she already knew about her daughter being pregnant. "I'm already starting to show, and we're pretty sure that there's already more than one. We're making sure that there's several children growing within me," Ammon said, earning a muttered comment from Luffy that had Ammon snorting with laughter. The rare sound earning wide eyes from all of the Charlottes, even the matriarch. "I'll admit that was funny, but say it again and you'll be sleeping on the deck. And no, I won't be joining you," Ammon said to Luffy, although she was still snickering a good bit. Ammon's siblings were all confused and kind of curious as to what her husband had said. But those that got what she meant by not joining him blushed brightly. "Why did you not call and alert me that you were pregnant as soon as you learned of it?" Big Mom asked, making the snail smile slightly. "It was a surprise, Mama." "Am I in trouble?" Ammon asked, causing Big Mom to snort slightly, although she was confused by the surprise part. "Only if you stop at one." "A surprise for what?" Big Mom asked, causing her children around her to look at each other and their eyes to widen. "What's today's date?" Ammon asked, seemingly at random, and making her siblings realize why she hadn't informed their mother immediately when she learned of the babies. "It's Mother's Day," Compote was the one to say, making Big Mom look at her startled. "Yep, happy Mother's Day, Mama. You're going to be a grandma again," Ammon said softly, and making Big Mom's eyes widened and then softened a little bit. "Happy Mother's Day to you too, Ammon. You're going to be a mother soon yourself. Call me as soon as you reach Tottoland or the children are here. I want to meet my grandchildren," Big Mom said, making the snail give her a brilliant smile that was a mirror of Ammon's own smile at the moment, even if her siblings weren't used to seeing her smile. "Don't worry, Mama. I'll call and tell you about them as soon as they're here," Ammon said before she was distracted by something else. "Luffy, stop tickling me," Ammon said with a squeal of laughter. "No, you were getting all crying, and even when you're happy I don't like seeing you cry." My pirate queen should never cry. She's much too beautiful, although you're still perfect even with the tears running down your face," Luffy could be heard saying as Ammon laughed while he tickled her. "Idiot," Ammon said fondly as he finally stopped tickling her. "You're idiot," Luffy said, and things were quiet for a minute. "Happy Mother's Day, Mama. I'll call you again soon," Ammon could be heard saying rather breathlessly. She hung up the snail, but not before they heard her give a deep moan that had them loving either green or bright red. "Is Sister Ammon hurt?" Inanna asked, tilting her head innocently. She was moaning pretty hard at the end and the beginning, Anglius said, frowning slightly as well. Most of the siblings that knew what the moans were but didn't have kids of their own looked panicked. "She was getting a massage, that's all. She's going to have a baby, so her back and ankles must be hurting," Compote said without batting an eye. "So he was making her back and feet stop hurting?" Inanna asked, blinking at her eldest sister, who smiled and nodded with no hint that she was lying. She had 7 kids and 5 grandkids of her own. She knew good and well how to keep little ones from knowing about sex until they were older. She also knew every excuse in the book to cover up strange sounds that little ones might hear. "Are you okay, Queen Amande?" Sora asked, looking up at Ammon, who was wincing as the group escaped from the marine base they landed in after leaving Skypedia, where Luffy and the crew had easily ended the war and kicked Enel all the way back to the West Blue Sea. The so-called god stood no chance against a crew full of veterans that at least knew the basics of armament hacking. "I'm fine. The little ones are just kicking extra hard today," Ammon said, reassuring the small painter who was learning how to be a cook and a fighter from Sanji while also learning a few assassin tricks from Robin, although most of it was more spying than assassin. "Learning how to blend in and not get caught by those looking for you. Disguises and all, just simple things that were more for evading capture than for killing." Although no matter how often they told her it was fine to drop the titles, she persistently stuck with them, calling Ammon Queen, Luffy King, and Little Pixie Princess, which, well, she wasn't wrong, but they didn't really like family using the titles with them. "Do you need to visit Chopper?" Luffy asked, fretting over his wife, who was 7 months pregnant now, but she looked farther along. She looked like she had when she was 9 months pregnant with Pixie. "I'm fine, Luffy. The babies are just proving that they have their daddy's strength," Ammon said, smiling at her husband, who had Pixie on his shoulders since they had been playing when Ammon had mentioned the children kicking her. "We're coming up on Water 7 now," Nami called, earning calls of acknowledgement from each of the crew members. Here was where they were going to get with Frankie and the Sunny, even though they would all miss Mary very much. "Robin, try not to get caught this time," Zoro said, although Luffy had a very different thought process. "All right, let's trash Anai's lobby," Luffy said happily and grinning eagerly and earning looks of disbelief from everyone. "Why would we do that? There's no need for it this time," Nami said, looking annoyed with her captain, who still proudly bore the Pirate King mark on his back for the world to see. Hey, his wife liked seeing him shirtless. Why would he stop just because of some ink on his back? Even if the ink did have most of the older Marines and pirates gaping in disbelief or gunning for his head more so than normal. Aokiji especially had tried to kill Luffy when he saw the marks, but Luffy had knocked him out easily and left the Admiral unconscious on the island. While they left him there after he and Pixie doodled on the man's face and stole his marine cape at least. Pixie seemed to like her newest blanket. "Well, the Mary can't take us any further, or at least not much further, so we should send her off with a bang and a final blaze of glory," Luffy said, frowning slightly as he looked at the Mary's figurehead. He was really going to miss the goat-styled ship that had carried them through their beginnings and so many adventures. The rest of the crew deflated and looked a bit upset as they realized that Mary was dying. "So that means," Usopp said, trailing off slightly and earning nods from the others. "Let's trash Anai's lobby." The rest of the crew choruses, as one earning a grin and laugh from Luffy. "I'll stay here with the backup crew and Pixie. I'm a bit too close to my due date to be trashing one of the 3 greatest marine bases," Ammon said, shaking her head amused and picturing her siblings' reactions to her husband destroying Anai's lobby. "That's fine. You can help us storm Marineford," Luffy said cheerfully and earning a small smirk from his wife. "Since you'll be her son-in-law and Ace is your brother, Mama might even join the war," Ammon said, wondering if she could trick her mother into it. The looks on the Marines' faces when not just Whitebeard but also Big Mom attacked. "That's going to be epic. We'll have to leave the kids somewhere safe though. With Crocus and Laboon, Shaggy and Rayleigh, the backup crew, or even on Amazon Lily. I don't want them in the war getting hurt," Luffy said, earning a nod of agreement from Amande. She didn't want her children hurt or in a war. "We'll see what happens as we go. For now we need to meet up with Frankie and then." Ammon trailed off with a grin as Luffy grinned back. "Let's trash Anai's lobby." "Luffy," Ammon's weak voice traveled through the den mushy to her husband, who was already destroying the normal soldiers of Anai's lobby. "What's wrong?" Luffy asked, immediately worried about his wife and his children as he answered the mushy. "Our children are here. I was going to call you as soon as I went into labor, but Pixie couldn't find the snail. Luffy, there's triplets, but one of CP9 took our youngest baby. Sora and I managed to save Pixie and the other 2, but our youngest." Ammon's voice was weak and sobbing and there was a crying in the background. "I'll get our baby back. I was going to trash this place for Mary. Now they're going to fucking die. Just stay there and stay with our babies. I'll be back soon. Luffy's voice was ice cold as his haki swept over the island of Anai's lobby, knocking out every single one of the normal rank and file marines and alerting his crew to a problem. You have till the count of 3 to give me back my baby before I destroy this entire damn island. Luffy growled at the barely conscious Spandam as Luffy's crew immediately rushed over to him, each becoming bloodthirsty and demonic when they heard why their king's haki had swept over the island mercilessly. Hearing the crying of a newborn baby, each of their eyes narrowed in on Khalifa, who was holding a shrieking pink blanket. Your baby will be a valuable asset to the government when raised and trained properly. I might even get a promotion because of this, Spandam said, even though he was pale at how demonic the entire crew looked as they stared at the government operatives. If you think Vice Admiral Garp will let you get away with stealing one of his great-grandchildren, then you have another thing coming. Luffy growled. Even still, this flag will protect us. Everyone except the crew gasped when Usopp shot down the world government flag without even waiting for the order. No mercy. Luffy gave the order, causing his crew to grin evilly as dozens of arms sprouted around Khalifa and snatched the child, breaking Khalifa's arms as more and more formed in an endless train until they got back to Robin, who took the child into her arms. I've secured the little princess, Robin said as Zoro and the others tore into the building and the CP9. Luffy just gently took his squalling daughter into his arms and cradled her gently. Hey there, baby princess. Don't worry. Daddy has you now and he'll teach them to try and take you from me and your mommy, Luffy said, holding his daughter to his chest so that she could hear his heartbeat as he kissed her tiny fuzz-covered head. She was a perfect little one to her father. She had dark blue fuzz on her head, a small light green-gray tint to her skin, a snake neck like her mother, and when she stopped yelling and opened her eyes they looked just like his, although it would probably change as she got older. When the blanket slipped a little and he glimpsed at her back, she had tiny black ink markings on her back. The pirate princess marked just like her big sister. That's right, sweetheart. It's okay now. Daddy has you, Luffy said, gently rocking on his feet as he cradled his baby, wondering what name Ammon would give her. Didn't she say something about Aries for a girl? Get everyone out of here and take the little princess with you. I'm reducing this place to rubble, Luffy said, gently passing his daughter back over to Robin as his crew finished decimating the building and doors that were supposed to represent justice. In less than an hour, the entire island was reduced to rubble and the crew was back to Water 7, where Ammon wasn't letting Sora, Pixie, or the other 2 newborns out of her sight. Caramel, oh God, sweetheart. Mommy is so sorry that you were taken. Ammon was holding her youngest daughter close, repeatedly kissing her head. So we're naming her Caramel, Luffy asked as he gently cradles his other 2 newborns. Caramel. The boy is Jordan, and our second oldest, Ammon said, looking at her eldest of the triplets, a little girl with pink fuzz and red eyes and her father's skin tone, although there was a hint of green. I want to name her Linlin, Ammon finally said, earning a smile from her husband, who stretched up and kissed her forehead. Then her name is Linlin. Hi Linlin, Jordan. I'm your daddy and this is your big sister Pixie, Luffy said as he kneeled down so that his oldest could meet her baby siblings. The little pink fuzzy-haired girl, and the little boy who had small black curls, Ammon's neck and skin tone, and Luffy's eyes. They're tiny, Pixie said, poking little Jordan's cheek. You were 2 when you were a baby. They'll be growing eventually, Ammon said, smiling at her eldest, who pulled a face at that. No, they stay little, not grow up, Pixie protested that, earning a grin from Luffy. Ammon laughed at her husband's proud words. That's my girl. Ammon's husband destroyed Anai's lobby. Custard, the 6th daughter, said, shocked as she stared at the newspaper, glancing up at her mother, who just laughed. Custard wondered whether she should mention just why exactly the pirate said he destroyed the marine stronghold. Ring ring ring. Ring ring ring. Clunk. The snail was answered quickly before handed over to Big Mom when Ammon's voice rang through it. 4, Ammon said, immediately making her siblings look confused. What? Big Mom questioned, furrowing her eyebrows at the snail. 4 mama. 4 babies, quadruplets, 3 girls, 1 boy, Ammon said, her voice tired but happy, and there was a brief crying heard in the background. Immediately all of her siblings' eyes widened at that as they stared at the snail. Really? Big Mom asked, her eyes widening and making Ammon hum her agreement even as she gently shushed the child that was crying. It's all right, Jordan. Mommy's got you, Ammon was heard whispering softly to the baby that was crying, causing his cries to slowly taper off. Yes, Mama. 4 beautiful little ones. 3 are snake necks like me, but 1 isn't. Although there was a bit of an incident, Ammon said, although she didn't sound happy at the end. Incident? Big Mom questioned, with her eyes narrowing almost immediately. While I was still out of it, CP9 managed to grab my youngest daughter and take her. Luffy and his crew got her back though, while I protected the rest of the children. They destroyed Anai's lobby in CP9, but we have our baby girl back. Then there's what happened to my eldest, Pixie, Ammon said, but she didn't sound too upset, so it couldn't be anything horrible, could it? What happened? Big Mom demanded, causing Ammon to sigh slightly. There was some other pirate nearby when Anai's lobby was reduced to rubble. She helped me guard the rest of the children, but she has some kind of age-based powers and her control can be a bit off, it seems. Pixie went from being a newborn to a very healthy and happy child in less time than it takes to blink, Ammon said, sounding just the tiniest bit annoyed at that, causing her siblings to exchange looks and confused mouthed-out sentences. Was such a thing even possible? Pixie, come here, sweetheart. Ammon called for her eldest, who raced over by the sound of pounding little feet. Mommy, Jordan okay? A rather high-pitched but young girl's voice asked, causing a soft chuckle from Ammon. Your baby brother is just fine, sweetheart. I wanted you to say hi to your grandma, Ammon said, her voice soft and loving and earning a slight squeak sound before there was a soft clambering noise. Hi, Granny, the little girl's voice said through the snail happily, making Big Mom smile softly in a way that was reserved only for her new grandchildren. Hello there, little one. What's your name and how old are you? Big Mom asked, her voice notably softer as she spoke to her grandchild. I'm Pixie and I'm 4, the little girl said happily before another baby began crying again. Amande, describe the children to me, Big Mom said as the second crying baby was hushed by a distinctly male voice. Pixie here looks just like me, snake neck and all, except for her nose and smile. Those come from her father. Jordan, the only boy of the 4, has his father's curly black hair already and his father's eyes, but he has my skin tone, neck and my fangs like his sisters. They all have my fangs, Ammon said, and she sounded a little choked up as she spoke about her babies. Each of her sisters understood, though. They had all felt the same after they had had their own children. My youngest, Caramel, has my hair and a slight green-gray tint to her skin, my neck, and her father's eyes. Ammon went on to describe her youngest, making Big Mom's eyes widened. None of her children ever named their own kids after the woman she had called mother. My second eldest, she has pink hair. She's the non-snake neck of the group. She has her father's skin tone with just a small hint of green, and she has red eyes. Mama I will her name is. Ammon trailed off, rather embarrassed now and making Big Mom raise an eyebrow. What's her name? Big Mom questioned, causing Ammon to grin slightly sheepishly at the snail. Well, Mama, I named her Linlin. I hope that's all right, Ammon asked at the end, making Big Mom and her other children nearby gasp loudly at that. None of them had the audacity to name their children after the Yonko herself. Each of them stared at their mother, wondering how she'd take this impertinence, only for them to gape at the sight of small tears in her eyes. It's fine, Amande. Bring them to visit soon, yes. I want to meet my grandchildren, Big Mom said, and then without another word she hung up the snail and stood up. She seemed rather dazed as she walked out of the room and back to her bedroom. The rest of her children stared at each other, shocked. They had never seen their mother act like that before. They need to start learning how to sleep on their own soon. They can't sleep with us every night, Ammon said, although her voice was soft and quiet as she gently stroked her baby's hair. They were just over 2 months old now, and right now all 3 of them were curled up on her chest, fast asleep with their sister curled into her side. I don't see why not, Luffy said from where he laid on her other side, his head propped up on his hand as he stared down at his wife and their children. He had just beaten up Moira, and Ammon was happy to see Lola again. Lola had been overjoyed at the sight of her big sister and had loved her little nephew and nieces to pieces. I love seeing you hold and interact with our children. You look so happy and natural, a baby in your arms or even in your belly, Luffy said, his free hand over the top of his wife's chest where the children were dozing, his fingers ghosting over their tiny heads gently as he softly played with their hair. A baby in my belly and more in my arms. Or perhaps the other way around. A baby in my arms and more in my belly. Either way, our babies need to sleep in their cribs soon. We had this discussion when Pixie was just born too, Ammon said, although she didn't seem too eager to let her children out of her sight, much less her arms. You love having a belly full, Luffy said, nuzzling his wife's hair and earning a small smile and slight sheepish hum. Ammon would have shrugged her shoulders a bit, but doing so would jostle the babies. I'm a Charlotte, dear. We're known for having large families. Most of my sisters actually compete to see who can have the most children before they stop, Ammon pointed out, even as she stared at her adorable little princesses and her prince, her first son. He was going to grow up to be just like his daddy. Maybe not exactly like his daddy, but he and his sisters were certainly going to be very lucky and protected. Ammon had been considered to be one of the best big sisters because she was always willing to babysit her nieces and nephews at any given time. She had seen and been disgusted by how most of her siblings seemed to take up their mother's approach of absent parenting, where the child had to prove their worth before the parents were even remotely interested. She never wanted to be like that. She wanted to make sure that her children knew that she loved them, that no matter what she would always love them. She knew that Luffy felt the same. He wanted to raise his children and make sure that no matter what they knew that he loved them. He didn't want them to question if they should have been born. He didn't want them to be like Ace and be told that they didn't deserve to live when they had done nothing wrong. Let's wait a few years before we have some more though. I remember about the War of the Best, and I don't want to be staying out of it because I'm pregnant when you might need my help to save your brother, Ammon said, making Luffy tense a bit as he wrapped an arm around her and Pixie both. Someone has to watch after the children, Luffy said, causing Ammon to tense as well, but she relaxed quickly when Jordan let out a small whine. Her little boy seemed to have his father's empathy. Nami and Sanji and even Zoro would love to stay with the children and protect them. I want to fight by your side, Ammon said, making Luffy sigh heavily at this. All right, if the children are weaned off before the war and stay somewhere safe with Sanji, Nami, Robin and Frank, then you can fight in the war with me. But if you're pregnant or the children are sick or anything at all, then you need to stay with them. They need at least one parent still there for them. They're going to need one of us, Luffy said as he pressed a kiss to the top of Ammon's head, holding her and their children close. I don't want them to grow up wondering if they were never wanted or loved. At least one of us has to live no matter what, for them, Luffy said, one hand laying gently on Caramel's back when she began whimpering. Yeah, Ammon agreed with him there as she looked at the beautiful little babies on her chest, looking at Pixie as well when her eldest murmured something in her sleep. For them, Ammon whispered as she held her babies closer ever so slightly. She would later look back on this and wonder if Luffy had known. She would look back at this and wonder if he planned it, wonder if he meant for it to happen this way. She would look back on this and hate herself for agreeing, but not her children. How could she ever hate the beautiful little ones that she and Luffy had made together? Her babies were all that kept her going for 2 years. Her babies and the slightest hope that her husband had survived. Amande, Big Mom, was surprised when her daughter suddenly crashed through a window and into the table hard, curled protectively around her children as she did so. What the hell? Flambe asked on high alert as she rushed to the window to see who had thrown her unconscious sister. Mama, a little girl with Ammon's looks, cried as she wiggled free from her mama and began shaking her as 3 little babies cried. Immediately the other siblings' eyes widened as they rushed to check on their sister and her children. The very instant that Mondi's hand came close to touching one of the crying infants on top of Ammon, however, a slim hand gripped her wrist and snake-pupiled red eyes shot open with a glare. Mama, Pixie cried happily at seeing her mother wake up, while Ammon blinked for a second at her big sister as her red eyes faded back to green. Mondi ni-san, Ammon questioned, confused and unfocused, but immediately beginning to soothe her children's cries. Alma, are you all right? You just came crashing through the window like a demented cannonball, Effie asked, looking at her slightly older sister, worried and alarmed and having one gun out just in case of further attacks. Hashi was directly in front of her sister, facing the window with her sword out and her eyes narrowed in rage as the 2 slightly younger Snake Neck women prepared to protect their triplet from any more attempted attacks. Aside from what's likely a small concussion and maybe a few broken ribs, I'm fine. How did I get here though? We were just on Sayabati. Ammon looked a bit confused and her gaze was slightly unfocused as she soothed the crying babies easily. Medic, someone get the medic over here to check on them, Mondi shouted to the others, causing Anglias to ride off on his motorcycled centipede quickly. Katakuri was hovering almost protectively behind his sister but quickly pulled Mondi out of the way when Anglias came speeding back in with his tires squealing and a doctor screaming on the back of his ride. Fix them or there will be no fixing you, Bruli threatened the doctor with a dark glare on her face and her scythe out for all to see. The doctor gulped heavily and quickly rushed to check on Amande and her children. Check on my babies first and you'd better hope that you can fix anything that's wrong. Bruli will be the least of your worries, Amande hissed at the doctor, who paled a bit further and quickly checked on the babies and Pixie. Mama, where daddy at? Pixie asked, looking confused as she looked around for her father, causing Ammon to look around as well as the doctor examined the 3 youngest and quickly deemed them healthy if not hungry. Get some baby food and bring it here immediately, over-ordered one of the chess peacekeepers with a dark look on his face and his body beginning to steam up a bit. Get bottles, milk, and formula. They aren't on food yet, Ammon quickly corrected her brother as the chess peacekeeper raced off. He must still be fighting whoever sent us here, sweetheart. Don't worry, your daddy is very strong and whoever hurt us is going to be in a world of pain before he's done, Ammon said, wincing a bit when the doctor prodded one of her ribs after proclaiming Pixie as healthy. Where we at? Pixie asked her mama curiously while the doctor checked her mother's eyes, earning a glare from the Snake Neck woman that had the doctor paling a little more. We're at Whole Cake Island. It's where Mama grew up and lived before she met your daddy, Ammon said as the doctor finally removed the light from her eyes, causing her to blink a little bit to get the spots out of her eyes. Then she reached for the freshly delivered baby bottles and formula and quickly began to feed her little ones. So who are they? Pixie asked, blinking up at all of the people staring at her and her mommy and her baby siblings that were starting to calm down now that they were being fed. Well, the really big lady up there on the throne is my mama, which makes her your grandma. All these people gathering around us though are my brothers and sisters, which makes them your uncles and aunties, Ammon said, smiling slightly towards her daughter, but her gaze was off just the slightest bit. I can feel at least 3 broken ribs, and she definitely has a mild concussion, the doctor reported, sweating nervously under all of the siblings' looks as they stared him down dangerously. Wow, Mama has lots of brothers and sisters. Pixie cried wide-eyed as she looked around at all of the rather diverse people in the room that were staring at her or her mom. Yes, I do, sweetheart. 84 of them, actually, Ammon said, smiling slightly as she glanced up at her siblings. She did truly love her brothers and sisters to pieces, even if her mother didn't deserve to be called a mother. Wow, well, I have lots of brothers and sisters too, Mama, Pixie asked, looking at her mother and earning a slight blush and laugh from the oldest of the snake necks. Your daddy and I will have to see about that later, princess. Now I know the babies were hungry, but what about you? Do you need to eat, Pixie? Ammon asked, immediately worrying about her eldest as she finished feeding all 3 of the babies, burping them gently. I'm hungry, but I'm big girl, Pixie said proudly, and causing Ammon to look at her eldest and plop the little snake neck down in one of the seats at the table. Eat. Even big girls need to eat, Ammon said as she stood up and cradled the babies close on habit more than anything else, only to wince when this aggravated one of her broken shoulders. Here, let me hold them while you get your ribs bandaged and take a shower. You landed right in a pile of whipped cream after all, Hashi said as she reached for the babies in her sister's arms, causing Ammon to glance up at her surprised. Biting her lip for a second, Ammon nodded and gently handed her babies over to the twin that was just a few seconds younger than her. There was just a few seconds in between Amande and Hashi, but there was almost 20 minutes in between them and Ephalie. Pixie, I want you to stay here with your siblings, aunties, uncles, and grandma until I get back, okay? Mama needs to wash off, Ammon said, wiping some of the whipped cream off of her dress as she looked at her eldest, who nodded and gave her a salute with a mouthful of cake. And don't eat a lot of sweets or else you'll lose your fangs early, Ammon said, making her daughter nod her head again as Ephalie moved to support her triplet, who stumbled a bit because of her slightly out-of-it vision. Come on, Amma. Let the others watch the kids while I help you. It'll be like when we'd all take a bath together when we were kids. Besides, you shouldn't be alone with that concussion, Ephalie said, helping the taller snake neck and supporting her towards the room that the triplets shared whenever they were in the shadow. Will Mama be okay? Pixie asked, staring after her mama, worried as Ephalie helped her out of the room. She'll be just fine, kiddo. Your mama is one of the strongest out of all of us. It'll just take her a while to be able to breathe easily and recover from her concussion, Hashi said as she sat beside her little niece that looked just like Ammon had at that age, aside from her eyes. Whereas Ammon had green eyes, or red when about to give in to her instincts, little Pixie had brown eyes. Now how about you tell Auntie Hashi all about your daddy and your little siblings here? Which one is which? Hashi asked, making Pixie brighten up as she stood on the chair and looked at her baby siblings. That's Jordan, Pixie said, pointing at the only boy of the 3 who was gurgling happily up at Hashi. That one's Caramel. Pixie pointed at the little girl with the same shade of hair as Pixie's own, while the little girl whimpered a bit. That's Lin, Pixie said, pointing at the pink-haired girl while Big Mom leaned forward interested. She wanted to meet her newest grandchildren, especially the one named after her. They really little, so we has to be careful of them. Daddy says they going to be big and strong when they get big, and when they get bigger I can play with them, Pixie said happily as she smiled at her siblings. She loved being the big sister. You really love your baby siblings, don't you? Prospero asked, his eyes softening as he looked at the little girl that was reminding him of the time back when Amande had been young and happy. I loves them lots. I hope I gets lots of brothers and sisters, but I'm Abby the strongest and the bestest, so no one hurts em. I'm attacked em like a good big sister, Pixie said, proudly nodding her head. So what are you going to learn how to use? A gun? Angel asked, looking at her little niece, who shook her head. Quite a few of the Charlotte siblings let out small chuckles at Pixie's next very proudly said words. I ma use a sword like Mama. How did you get back here, Amande, and where is your husband? Big Mom asked, looking at her daughter when the woman returned, and she seemed to be in much better condition now than she was earlier. Let me see the paper, Ammon said, making Bruley hand over the morning's paper without hesitation. Right now he's probably trying to find a way either into Impel Down or to get to Marineford, Ammon said dryly as she looked at the paper. Why would he be doing that? Oven asked, confused and startled, and making Ammon turn the paper towards them. The Marines are going to try and execute Fire Fist Ace, Ammon said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world and only serving to confuse them all some more. Uncle Ace? Pixie asked, looking at the paper and making her mother smile softly at her. That's right, sweetie. Your daddy's going to rescue Uncle Ace, Ammon said, running her fingers through her daughter's hair and then glancing up at her siblings. Fire Fist Ace happens to be my husband's older brother, Ammon said, and at that more than a few eyebrows raised up. So he's a Whitebeard pirate, Montdor said, more than asked as he stared at his sister. Not at all. He and Ace were raised together on the same island as stepbrothers, and when they were kids they had exchanged a sake cup to become real brothers. My husband doesn't bow down to or answer to anyone, Ammon said, shaking her head in the negative. As for how I got here, some slavers grabbed a friend of my husband's, a mermaid, and when setting her free he punched a celestial dragon in the face so hard I'm surprised the guy didn't die outright. Of course that resulted in an admiral being called on us and he stayed behind to take him out while the rest of us made it to the ship to get ready to set sail. Considering my husband joined us right as we were ambushed by the warlord Kuma, I'd say Kuma is likely dead now since the kids and I were the first ones warped away. Ammon said, looking unbothered as she looked at the news article and clenched her teeth down so hard that they were grinding together almost audibly. Her husband was going to be there, at Marineford again, and she couldn't be there to help him. She had promised him that she'd stay with the children. That way, even if he died, then their children had at least one parent there to love them and take care of them, to raise them with all the love and support that neither of the couple had in their own childhood. Are you going there then? Bruley asked her older sister, who gave a sad smile as she looked up at them and then down at her children. No, make no mistake that I want to be there fighting by his side, but I promised him that no matter what, if we got separated somehow, then I'd stay with the kids. That way if something happens to him, then at least one of us will be alive to look after our children, Ammon said softly as her hand dropped to Pixie's head and began to comb through the girl's soft hair. Good. You wouldn't want to risk your children becoming orphans, Amande said, nodding her head in agreement and earning a small nod from her sister, who stared softly down at her children. Exactly. I'd never want them to have to suffer through that. That's why, no matter how much I wish otherwise, I won't be going to Marineford to help him, Ammon said quietly as she continued to comb her fingers through Pixie's hair, trusting her sisters with her 3 babies since the hungry little ones were still drinking from their bottles. How much can these kids eat? Hashi asked in disbelief as she was on the 3rd bottle for caramel. A lot. Trust me, breastfeeding was a nightmare until I got them on bottles. They have their dad's appetite, Ammon said, smirking slightly at that as she took Linlin and began to feed her the bottle with one hand, already fixing up another one with her free hand. Yeah, I bet it was, Compote said, noting how much the babies were eating as she watched Amande feed Jordan. Remember not to eat too many sweets, Pixie. They aren't good for your fangs, Ammon reminded her daughter, who pouted as she put down the 6th slice of cake she had been reaching for. Yes, Mama, Pixie said, making Ammon smile at her softly again. That's my girl, Ammon said, making Pixie beam up at her mother, showing that she was missing her front tooth. Can I go practice with my sword, Mama? Pixie asked, and immediately all of the siblings looked at Ammon stunned. She was letting her 4-year-old swing around a sword. You'll have to wait until Mama can get you another practice sword, baby. Yours was left on the ship when we got sent away, remember? Besides, you were about to be moved from regular wood to bamboo anyways, Ammon said, making Pixie lit up brilliantly. Really? I get a bamboo one now? Thank you, Mama, Pixie said, hugging her mother's legs and making the woman roll her eyes fondly but reach one hand down to pat her daughter's head. Don't thank me, sweetheart. You worked hard for it, Ammon said, making Pixie beam up at her mother brightly. I can't wait until we see Papa and Aunt Nami and Aunt Robin and Uncle Zoro again. I want to show them my bamboo sword, Pixie said, near vibrating in place while Ammon sighed slightly but was smiling. We don't know how long it'll be, sweetheart. Remember that they talked about a training trip. By the time that's done, you might be onto real swords, Ammon said, making Pixie look even more eager at that. She couldn't wait until she started using a real sword and was strong like her mama. Surely your husband will come and see you and the children during this training trip, Prospero asked, looking at Ammon sharply at that. If he's in any shape to after he's done raging hell at Marineford, he will. He'd never leave me and the children alone, Ammon assured her older brother. She had no idea that it'd be 2 years until she saw her husband and his crew again. 2 long years where she desperately hoped that her husband was alive, even though it didn't look good. Sister, Smoothie looked concerned as she looked at her big sister after she and a few others had returned from Marineford. Mama had sent them there under orders to make sure that Luffy made it out alive. She wanted to meet her new son-in-law after all, and he proved to be very interesting. The fact that saving Ace put Whitebeard in their debt was a bonus, a very good one. That and the looks on the Marines' faces when they realized that Big Mom pirates were interested in the apparent rookie. Yeah, a few of the Charlotte siblings were going to be laughing for a while. Is he? Ammon asked, paling at the look on her sister's face, and Smoothie put a hand on her older sister's shoulder softly. We don't know, but it didn't look good. He took a fistful of magma to his gut while protecting his brother. When we left, he was with a couple of doctors, Smoothie said gently but bluntly to her sister. Ammon didn't need it to be sugar-coated. She needed the facts and blunt truth. Fire Fist Ace managed to get out alive along with most of the Whitebeard crew in Alliance. Whitebeard, however, didn't make it. He stayed behind to let his crew escape and said that the One Piece is real, Deifuku said while Ammon was pale and seemed a bit wide-eyed as she held Jordan close, Linlin and Caramel being cuddled by Amande and Compote respectively. There's a very real chance that your crazy husband is. I'm sorry, Nissan. Smoothie apologized to her sister, who shook slightly but closed her eyes tightly to fight back her tears. Her husband, her king. At least last time, even though he lost his big brother, he had only gotten a scar on his chest that wasn't dangerous before going on the cruise 2-year training trip. 2 years, Ammon said softly as she opened her eyes and held her son closer. Nissan, Smoothie asked, confused and making Ammon sigh heavily. I'll give it 2 years. Then I'll head to Sayabari again and find out for sure whether he's really gone or not, Ammon said, and what was unsaid was the fact that she'd be spending those 2 years taking care of her children and training her own skills as well. Nissan, Smoothie seemed sad as if she knew her sister was clinging on to false hope. Your husband is dead. Accept it and move on, Daifuku said coldly to his sister, who glared darkly at him. My husband is strong enough to defeat you with ease, Oni-san. He would not die that easily. He would not die and leave me and the children behind, Ammon said, her voice soft but stern. She fully believed it. Her husband was alive. He had to be. He had promised, and he never broke a promise to her. Mommy, look, Auntie Hachi helped me get a sword. Pixie came rushing over with a bamboo sword held proudly in her hands, and her aunt right behind her. I see that, baby. Did you tell your Aunt Hachi thank you? Ammon asked, smiling down at her daughter, who nodded her head rapidly. She hasn't stopped saying thank you or hugging me ever since I gave it to her, Hachi said with a snort, and Ammon smiled softly as she dropped one hand to her daughter's head, running her fingers through her daughter's curls while her other hand kept Jordan held close to her chest. That's a good girl, Pixie. We're going to be staying here with your aunties, uncles, and grandma for a while, okay? Daddy got hurt saving Uncle Ace, so we're staying here till he gets all better, Ammon said softly to her daughter, who nodded her head at that. Okay, Mommy, I'm gonna get lots stronger for when we meet Daddy again, Pixie said, smiling brightly at that and making Ammon smile down at her daughter. I know you will, baby, but don't forget, Daddy's really strong, so you don't need to be too strong. Besides, I'll be counting on your help with your brother and sisters, Ammon said, making Pixie beam at that and hold her arms out to take Jordan from her mother. Remember how I showed you to hold him, Ammon said, sitting down in the chair at the table and sitting her daughter in her lap as she adjusted her arms slightly until they were good enough. Don't drop him, sweetheart, Ammon said, gently settling Jordan in his sister's arms and making Pixie beam as she held her little brother close. I won't, Mama. Hi, Jordan, remember me. I'm your big sister, don't worry, I won't drop you, Pixie said brightly, and then began to talk to her little brother in her arms while he gurgled and gave a gummy smile. Mama, he's not talking, he's being rude, Pixie said, and Ammon laughed lightly as she took caramel from her sister. Baby, he's too little to talk. He won't be talking for another few months. He's not being rude, he just doesn't know how yet, Ammon said, amused as she looked at her eldest, who blinked up at her like that and then gave a grin that was just like her father's. Then I'll teach him, Mama. Just wait, Jordan. When we go see Daddy again, you'll be able to say lots of words, Pixie said brightly to her little brother, and Ammon just smiled as she held Caramel close while keeping Pixie on her lap. She doesn't doubt that her father is alive, does she? Amande questioned quietly while Daifuku gave a derisive snort. She's a child and Ammon is being too soft. She'll find out the truth soon enough, Daifuku said, sneering at how one of his strongest and eldest sisters was acting. Ammon just reached her free arm out for Linlin and kept all of her children close. Luffy, please be alright. The kids need you, I need you. In 2 years she'd find out one way or the other. It was 2 years later, and Ammon was now on Sayabari looking for her crew and true family. Pixie standing there holding her baby brother's hand while he held Caramel's hand, and Caramel held Linlin's hand while Ammon had leaned down enough to hold Linlin's other hand as they walked through the island. On Pixie's other side was Daifuku, who refused to hold his niece's hand, while Smoothie was there as well and holding her niece's hand happily, but her smile was sad and Ammon knew why. Pixie was happily telling her little sisters and brother all about their daddy and how much their daddy was going to play with them and hug them and everything. She had no doubts at all that her father was alive. Smoothie had been there on the battlefield, however, and had seen the hole in Luffy's stomach just like Daifuku had. Daifuku had no doubts at all that Luffy was dead and his sister was being weak and stupid by clinging to what he thought was false hope that her husband had survived. Straw Hat Luffy coming through, a fat man said as a group of people who didn't resemble the Straw Hats at all began to push through the crowd that parted for them. What? Ammon's head snapped around. Her husband's haki was in the area, but it wasn't coming near her right now. No, the one coming near them was a fat bastard with a rip-off of Luffy's outfit. Move it, lady. I'm Straw Hat Rookie, brother of Fire Fist Ace and son of the world's greatest criminal doctor. Show me the tattoo. Ammon interrupted him with a dark glare. What? The fat green-haired guy asked while everyone around her blinked. Straw Hat Luffy has a burnt X mark on his chest and a tattoo on his back. Show it to me, Ammon demanded, making the fake Straw Hats begin to sweat heavily. Who are you? The fake Straw Hat was cut off by Pixie running over and kicking him in the leg, making him yell curses as he cradled his injured leg. You're not my daddy. You're a fake, Pixie yelled at the fake Straw Hat, who was hopping up and down on one leg. Pixie, stay with your Aunt Smoothie, Ammon ordered her daughter as she quickly bundled her 3 almost 3-year-olds and her 1 almost 6-year-old over to her younger but taller sister. I ought to slam. That was the sound of Ammon's sheathed sword slamming into fake Luffy's head. You aren't my husband. My husband is not a piece of fat filth like you. Ammon snarled at the fake Luffy. Huh, husband? The fake Sanji asked, paling in disbelief. My name is Monkey Amond. I am Monkey D. Luffy's wife. There is no way possible my husband would not recognize me and our children. Ammon growled at the fakes as she glared darkly at them all. They all immediately went pale white. They had heard that the real Straw Hat was married and had a kid, but they hadn't been able to get a good enough picture of her and the kid to find fakes. I told you, sister, your husband is dead. Deifuku sneered slightly while Ammon shot him a glare. Pixie kicked him in his shin though. Daddy's not dead. I can tell. He's right over there. Pixie yelled as she pointed in the direction Ammon felt her husband's haki rapidly approaching. The fake Straw Hat tried using her distraction to attack Ammon, but not only was he vastly out of his league against the woman, but he also ended up on the bad side of someone very strong immediately. Boy, hands off of my wife, the real Straw Hat said, his foot in the fake's face as he kicked the guy almost clear across the grove with ease. Landing on his feet, the newcomer looked up and all of the fake Straw Hats began freaking out. After all, the face was the same on the bounty poster. Luffy, Ammon beamed at the sight of him but had to hold herself back a bit. Prove that you're him, Ammon requested, and Luffy merely grinned up at her before stretching his legs and chest out until he was a little taller than her, and his bare torso showed off his X burn on his chest and now the giant circular burn on his stomach as well as the Pirate King ink on his back. Ammon beamed with tears in her eyes. It was him. It was really him. Her husband was alive. She immediately pulled him into a passionate, loving kiss as one of his arms wrapped around her waist to hold her close. Daddy, Pixie happily cried out as she glomped her father's leg. Luffy immediately swung her up in his free arm. Princess, you've grown so big, baby girl. I thought I told you that you weren't allowed to grow up, Luffy said, beaming as he held his daughter close, and then his eyes zeroed in on the 3 toddlers nearby staring up at him wide-eyed. Ammon, those are them, right? Jordan, Linlin, and Caramel? Luffy asked, staring at the 3 toddlers while his wife gave a choked sob and nodded her head. Babies, come here, come say hi to your daddy. Ammon pulled away from her husband to beckon her 3 youngest children over to her. Luffy dropped to his knees, still holding Pixie close with one arm, and stared awestruck at the 3 toddlers that came over to their mother's legs. Hi there, my little princesses, my little prince. It's so nice to see you again, Linlin, Caramel, Jordan ... You don't remember me, but I'm your daddy, Luffy said softly as he stared at his 3 youngest and felt himself choke up with tears in his eyes. They were so big, already 2 years old and nearly 3. They were already walking and talking now. He had missed everything from their first steps to their first words. Hi, Daddy, Linlin said first as she toddled over to smile at her dad, just as fearless and brave as her namesake. Daddy, Jordan was just like his father and launched himself at his father with a wide beaming smile. Papa, Caramel said softly as she was the last of the trio to slowly approach her father, who gathered all of his children into his arms. It's so nice to see you again. I've missed the 5 of you for these last 2 years, Luffy said softly as he stood with all 4 of his children in his arms and also abusing his rubber power to pull his wife into his side. So you're the weak little brat that knocked up my sister, Deifuku sneered, and Luffy glared at him for interrupting the moment, as did Amande and Smoothie and even the fake Straw Hats along with the bystanders. How dare he ruin the touching reunion between the family? Any complaints if I knock him out? Luffy asked, glancing at his wife and then at Smoothie, remembering her from the last time around when he had ended up attacking Whole Cake Island. None. He's been unbearable for the last year, Smoothie said immediately. I've been tempted to do it myself for the last few weeks especially, Ammon said, and Deifuku snarled as he got ready to summon his genie. Oi, how dare you interrupt the captain and his queen? A sheathed sword slammed into Deifuku's face from the side and a black-clad foot slammed into stomach as 2 people took exception to Deifuku's presence. Captain, Queen, Little Prince, Princesses, your loyal crew and steed await, Zoro said, bowing to his captain and the family he had silently sworn to himself to protect with his everything. And I'll have a yummy feast whipped up for you in mere moments after we arrive at the ship. Everyone's eager to see you all again, Sanji said, and at that point all 4 of the children proved just who their father was. Food. All 4 children cheered, making Sanji look horrified while Zoro busted out laughing as Luffy grinned proudly. It sure surprised my siblings that all of our children had your appetite, my dear, Ammon said with a laugh of her own as she stared softly down at her children, at the only reasons she had lasted these last 2 years. Hey, don't just blame it on me. You can pack it away too. You're even hungrier than I am sometimes, Luffy said, making Ammon raise an eyebrow at her husband. Is that a complaint? Ammon asked, making Luffy snort slightly. We spend a lot of time fighting, probably going to spend a lot of time chasing and protecting the kids, and always end up spending a lot of time doing our favorite activity. We both need all the energy we can get. I definitely have no room to complain about anyone eating a lot, Luffy said dryly and making Ammon smile slightly. Damn right you don't. Just wait until later when the kids are asleep. We have 2 years to make up for, Ammon said, and Smoothie blushed slightly at the dirty things her sister could mean with that. Shishishishishi. Anytime and anywhere, dear. But for now, how about we get to the ship and see the others? Word of warning, I'm not going to let go of you or the kids for a while, Luffy said brightly, and Zoro snorted slightly, pretending not to notice Smoothie eyeing him curiously. None of us will blame you, Cap. Just don't be surprised if all of us end up stealing the kids for a while each. We want to get to know our nephew and nieces, and I see Pixie's up to bamboo now, heavy bamboo at that. You've been keeping up with your sword training, princess? Zoro asked, and Pixie immediately nodded with a bright smile as she wiggled to get to her favorite uncle. Uncle Zoro. Yes, been training with Mama and lots of my aunties who use swords, Pixie said, squirming in her daddy's arms. Well, we'll see how far you've come when we get somewhere safer, princess. I might use 3 swords instead of 1, but I know a few tricks for only 1 sword, Zoro promised his niece, who squealed at that. Speaking of Luffy, you have to let us go so we can get to the ship, Ammon said, smiling at her husband, but she didn't want him to let her go, and she knew he knew it. No, I don't. Oi, Amma's sister. You coming with us? Then you'd better keep up, Luffy said to Smoothie, and then he picked his wife and kids up in his arms. Smoothie blinked, and as soon as she did, Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji, all 3 were gone. It's great to see you all again, Ammon said when Luffy let her down once they were on the ship, the children cheering at how fast their daddy moved. My queen. Robin gave a small smile as she curtsied. Oi, I might be the queen, but that doesn't mean you all have to keep calling me that. Zoro does it cause he's a loyal rabid dog for Luffy. The rest of you don't have to, as one, almost as if they had practiced it. The rest of the crew began barking at her. I might be the most obvious one, but we're all loyal dogs for our master, Zoro said with a grin as Pixie giggled loudly at all the barking. The other 3 kids looking shy and unsure but smiling slightly at them, aside from Jordan, who was laughing loudly and beaming at them. Kenki. I thought I was the only one who called him that. Ammon didn't skip a beat, making the rest of the crew snort or snicker, aside from Nami, who wasn't amused, and Brooke, who laughed. Not what we meant, Nami said dryly, although she knew that Ammon was just teasing. I know. Ammon trailed off as she looked at her husband, her smile falling when she saw the circle in his stomach again. Luffy, do you mind if I ask how that happened? You're certainly strong enough to take out some admirals, so how? Ammon asked, looking at her husband and gesturing to his stomach. Her siblings hadn't told her how he had been hurt, just that he had been gravely hurt. They had all been busy with their own fights. I was fighting Kizaru and Aokiji along with Sengoku and occasionally a vice admiral or commodore that got close enough when I noticed Ace was losing his fight with Akainu, cause of his pride and temper. I managed to knock me opponents away and got to Ace in time to knock him away from the magma fist. Took a nasty hit to my stomach before I could raise my armament in time, though. The doctor guy said it was surprising that it didn't do as much damage internally as he thought it would, but I almost always keep my organs coated in haki just in case, so. Luffy shrugged it off, and Ammon sighed and pulled him close to kiss his cheek. I'm glad you managed to save your brother, but if there's a next time ... don't worry me like that again. My siblings came back saying that you took a magma fist through your stomach and didn't look like you'd survive, Ammon said, making Luffy's face go dead serious. I don't know how they got that. While the magma did hurt, I was still able to move and fight until we all got away. Although that was probably because I had Eva-chan pump some numbing hormones into me after I kicked Akainu clear across the island. Besides, I'd never leave my crew, my nakama, and I'd certainly never leave my pirate queen and our little prince and princesses, Luffy said, pulling a funny face at the kids in his arms as he slowly lowered the toddlers down onto the deck. Pixie already taking off to hug everyone and then show her favorite uncle her new skills with the sword. You'd better not, or I'd bring you back to life just so I can kick your ass myself, Ammon said, wrapping her arms around him while he stretched his legs out again so that he could wrap his arms around her and hold her to his chest, where her ear was pressed against the X-burn so that she could listen to his heartbeat. I'm pretty sure he's into that, Usopp muttered to Frankie, who snorted loudly and tried to stifle it. They were both smacked upside the head by Robin. Oi, make sure you have fun rising back to the top, you kids, Rayleigh called from the hill where he and Shaki were standing watching over the Sunny and the group on it. Oh Rayleigh, we will. I'll even send you both an invite to the formal wedding. Hey kids, say goodbye to Rayleigh and Shaki, Luffy called back, grinning and waving at them with one arm while his other was still wrapped around Yamato's waist. Bye Ray Gigi. Bye Shaki Boss-san, Pixie yelled, waving goodbye to the old couple and making Rayleigh nearly lose his footing and slip down the hill a bit. Shaki just laughed and waved goodbye to the kids, the 3 toddlers yelling their goodbyes as well after their big sister did. Luffy laughed loudly at Rayleigh's slipping a bit, and when he regained his footing, Rayleigh laughed as well and waved goodbye to the kids. Incoming fire, Usopp warned them from the other side of the ship, spotting a few marine boats firing cannonballs at them. None of the original crew made a move to deflect the cannonballs while Amande and her group, who had managed to stay with the Sunny to protect her, began to move as if to deflect the cannonballs. Robin walked over to the children and introduced herself to the youngest ones before growing some extra hands to tickle them all at the same time, the kids laughing loudly and immediately trying to jump onto Robin to tickle her back. Slave arrow, a voice said, and instantly the cannonballs were turned to stone and fell to the ocean long before they hit the Sunny. Isn't that the ship of the Kujo pirates? Brancha asked, staring at the flag and noticing how none of the main crew looked surprised. Oi Nami, you're on Sanji duty, Luffy said as he approached the railing, and Nami immediately stole Sanji's spyglass from him as he ran over to the railing. And Usopp cheerfully kept his own from the cook. Did that goddess just wink at us? Daja asked while Jellin turned to stone at the sight of the pirate empress. Thanks Hancock. See you all later, Luffy called to the warlord, and even from here the rest of the Straw Hats could see her blushing and falling back into one of her sister's waiting arms. Apparently they had expected that. You know the pirate empress? Celsa asked in disbelief as she looked at Luffy. Yeah, when Kuma sent everyone flying he sent me to Amazon Lily. I ended up making friends with them. Although for some reason Hancock keeps asking me to marry her even when I've already told her I'm happily married, Luffy said, and instantly all of the side crew, as they called themselves, and Ammon stared at Luffy in disbelief. The man-hating pirate empress asked you to marry her? Brancha asked, gaping in disbelief at the Straw Hat King. Yeah, at least once or twice every time she sees me, Luffy said, nodding as if it were a common thing, and the side crew just felt their jaws drop a little lower, the two fishmen bowing to Luffy while Sanji looked jealous as hell. Robin and Nami were just laughing to themselves. What the fuck? Ella asked in disbelief, and Luffy just shrugged. Yeah, she's kind of weird. She was nice but weird, Luffy said, and Ammon was putting this aside for the moment to focus on something else. Wait, you knew the warlord Kuma was sending everyone away? Ammon asked, making Luffy nod. Yeah, he explained it after I nearly killed him for sending you and the kids fly. Apparently he worked for the Revolutionary Army and my dad, so he sent everyone but Branch's group away to different islands so that they can train. Unfortunately, the government made him into a robot after the fact, but I put him out of commission during the war so he doesn't have to suffer anymore. And as a little bit of revenge for not sending me with you and the kids, Luffy said, and Ammon rubbed her temples. I think I need a nap. All of this is giving me a headache, Ammon said while Nami got the ship ready to set sail. Their destination, Fishman Island. Do you want me to join you or? Luffy asked, honestly torn on whether to join her for the nap or not. After all, he did want to spend time with his kids. No, you spend time with the children. You can join me tonight, Ammon said, and the rest of the crew sighed slightly but were mostly fondly amused at her words. Not even back together for a day, and they're already getting ready for the next kid, Nami said, sighing and making Brooke laugh. Most likely multiple kids. She's from a set of quadruplets and her family is known for having multiple children. Chopper trailed off as Jordan toddled over to him to play with the reindeer doctor, who was beaming at the fact that the kids weren't scared of him. Phew. Maybe she plans on having so many that her uterus breaks from the strain of it all, Robin asked as she kept tickling Linlin, who seemed to have claimed Robin as her favorite auntie and was trying to stop squealing in laughter long enough to tickle Robin back. Thank you for that lovely mental image, Ammon drawled sarcastically to the archaeologist, who merely chuckled again. My pleasure. Is that one of the tart ships following us? Jolin asked as they were going down and down further in the sea towards Fishman Island, him spotting it a bit behind them while he was checking the rudders and all. Yeah, they've been following us for a while now. Almost an hour after we submerged, Usopp said without even looking, instead having long since felt and seen them with his observation hack. And we're just going to let some of Big Mom's crew follow us? Daja asked, looking a bit hesitant at that and making the original crew nod their heads. Yeah, pretty much. It's not like they'll try anything that's Smoothie and Deifuku on board. They're both devil fruit users. If their bubble pops, it's unlikely that any of the other crew members will be able to get them back onto the ship or in an air bubble. Most of the crew members are rather small compared to the two Charlottes on board, Luffy said without looking away from where he was coloring with his two youngest daughters while his son was reading with Robin. Pixie was training with Zoro using her bamboo sword. She was skilled enough to be upgraded to a real one, but given how young she was, the crew were holding off on giving her a real steel sword until she was at least 7 or 8. So we just ignore them? Celsa asked, just to be sure. Yes, the entire original crew, and Ammon said immediately. Okay then. The backup crew just shrugged and went along with it. Honestly, they weren't going to be surprised by anything the Straw Hats' main crew did anymore. Not since their captain declared war on the world government and survived fighting the fleet admiral head-on during the War of the Best. Ace Nai is supposed to be meeting us at Fishman Island with some of the others. This ought to be fun then, huh? Luffy asked, grinning at the rest of the crew, who smirked slightly, knowing that he was referring to Hody Jones and his little army ... as well as the fact that Luffy had said he'd kick Big Mom's ass. They wondered how that would play out this time now that she knew he was married to her daughter and had several children with said daughter. Good job. You're almost ready to try and learn a flying slash, Zoro said, patting Pixie on the head while the girl beamed up at him with 2/3 the radiance of the sun, showing that despite taking after her mother greatly in looks, she had her father's smile. Yeah, did you hear that, Mama? Uncle Zoro said I'm going to learn a flying slash soon. Pixie ran to her mother, who smiled gently down at her and pulled the child into a hug. I heard. I'm proud of you, baby. You're learning very fast, Ammon said, smiling as she cuddled her oldest child, kissing the top of her head. Daddy, did you hear Uncle Zoro? Pixie asked, turning to her dad and earning a grin and laugh from him as he kissed the top of her head as well when she ran over for a hug. I heard, Princess. You're doing so well and have grown so much. Before long you'll be the world's greatest swordswoman, Luffy said, grinning, and Zoro smiled softly as he recalled his old friend. If anyone can do it, it'd be one of the princesses, Zoro said, smiling as he stared down at the girl who grinned widely up at him. Daddy. Linlin looked up at her daddy with wide eyes and he smiled at her, instantly scooping her into his arms and then onto his lap as she showed him her picture of a throne. She was already better at coloring than her dad, something that amused the crew to no end if us of Snort was any indication. Yes, Princess, Luffy asked, smiling at his youngest, who grinned up at him and held up the picture proudly. When I grow up, I want to be a Yonko and have a throne, like Granny, Linlin said, and Ammon smiled fondly at her daughter. It seems like her mother had a large soft spot for Ammon's 4 children, especially the one named after the elder woman herself. Little Linlin absolutely adored her grandma and kind. He'll be the best Yonko in the world, and with the best throne to match, Luffy said with absolutely no hesitation at all as he rubbed his nose against his daughters. Frankie made a mental note to find, or rather make, a small throne for the princess when they got to Fishman Island. You want them to be pirates too? Selsa asked curiously as she looked at her captain, who smiled happily as Pixie tried to show her little sister how to hold a sword right, Caramel happily coloring some more. They can be whatever they want to be. Marine, pirate, Yonko, archaeologist, cook, navigator, civilian, I don't care what they want to be, as long as they're safe and happy, Luffy said softly as Robin finished reading the picture book to Sabo, who asked for another story. You were worried at first, but you're a wonderful father, Luffy, Ammon said, smiling at her husband as she moved closer and sat next to him on the deck, stretching out so that she could lean against him with her head on his shoulder. And you're a wonderful mother, Luffy said, grinning, and with no hesitation as Caramel took her picture and began to crawl all over her mother. Look, Mama, it's you and Auntie Effie and Auntie D and Auntie Hash, Caramel said, showing her mother her picture of the quadruplet snake necks. Although her coloring skill was only slightly better than her daddy's, her drawing was top-notch. Ammon smiled at the carefully drawn outlines of her and her sisters that had colors mixing and running over the lines and making a large colorful mess that vaguely resembled people. It's a wonderful picture, baby. It looks just like us, Ammon said softly as she carefully held the picture, snagging her daughter with one arm and kissing her head. Boy Sanji, can we put the pictures up on the fridge with Pixies? Luffy asked, grinning and making the chef smirk as he carefully took the offered pictures. Of course, Captain. They'll have a proper spot on the fridge to show the world the amazing drawings done by the princesses, Sanji said, moving back towards the kitchen to find the perfect spots for the pictures to be placed. Hey, make sure you get me a copy of the throne little Linlin wants. I'll see if I can make it once we get to Fishman Island. Frankie stopped Sanji with a whisper, making the chef smirk and nod his head in understanding. Looks like Sabo-kun loves books, Robin asked, giggling when the boy fell asleep on her, listening to her reading Norland's tale. He does. Monty Dor was already starting him on reading and writing back at the Shadow, and he spends more time in the library than most of my siblings combined, Ammon said, smirking slightly, and Robin chuckled as she ran her fingers through the boy's hair. Well, if it's all right with you two, I'd be more than happy to teach the little ones how to read and write, and start Pixie Heim on some basic math, Robin offered, being the most well-read of the entire crew, except maybe Ammon herself, as she looked at the children fondly. Even still, Ammon was a combatant and island leader first, and while she did have to read and write and do math for her jobs, Robin was an archaeologist. She'd been reading high-level materials and all since she was a child. Ammon knew that without a doubt Robin was probably the most book-smart member of the crew, and a good deal sea-smart too, given her childhood of being a criminal. Of course, no matter what career path they choose to follow, reading, writing, and mathematics would be useful, Ammon said, and Luffy nodded his head in agreement, even though he would openly say that his reading and writing weren't the best and he was crap at any kind of math. I'm going to take a nap, dear. Be a good pillow for me, Ammon asked, glancing up at her husband, who kissed her head and moved slightly to make her more comfortable while Caramel and Linlin curled up as well on their mother. It was nap time after all. We still have a while to go before we reach Fishman Island, so take a nap, love. Who's on guard duty till we get there? Luffy asked, glancing at the others since he knew they had a rotation set up. According to the chart, Robin-san is on duty. Sora reported from the kitchen where the chart was hung up to remind some of them, mainly Zora, when it was their turns. The girl having spent the 2 years training and learning under Shaki. Heaven help whatever poor bastard tries something then, Zoro said with a snort, and the senior crew all nodded in agreement with that. Brooke clearing up some of the confusion and curiosity of the crew that Ammon brought with her, but also making them very scared of the softly smiling woman. Agreed. Zoro might be the demon mutt, but Robin-san is the king's assassin. For a very good reason. Hey, Luffy, Ace waved brightly when he saw his brother's ship dock at Fishman Island. Although he tensed when he saw a Charlotte pirate exit the ship behind his brother. The rest of the Whitebeard pirates behind Ace all tensed and got ready for a fight. After all, Big Mom had been wanting to take Fishman Island from Pops for the last 2 years. Oi, Ace Nai, come meet my wife and kids, Luffy said grinning, and he had Jordan and Caramel in his arms while Linlin rode on his head wearing his hat, Pixie beside him holding her practice sword and trying to mimic her mother's stance, which looked pretty adorable. Ace relaxed, recalling meeting Amande and Pixie when he and Luffy met up at Alabasta, and making his crew relax as well despite some of them exchanging looks. The kid was married to Demon Lady Amande, and had knocked her up at least twice. You joining Big Mom, Luffy? Ace asked, honestly curious for a moment before he realized how stupid that question is. Nope, Luffy said with a cheerful laugh. Don't tell my younger siblings when they get here in about an hour, but I'm part of the Straw Hats, not the Big Mom pirates, Ammon said, smirking at the Whitebeard pirates who blinked once, twice, and then Ace laughed while most of his ship brother's jaw dropped. A Big Mom pirate was betraying her mother. Not that they blamed her with how her mother acted, mind, for an upcoming pirate who was only about to enter the new world now. And her siblings weren't too far behind them, yet she said that so openly as if she didn't care if untrusted ears overheard, and informed her siblings. What the hell? Nice to meet you all, Ammon said, smiling at them all, and they carefully did not show their shock at the sight of the woman actually smiling. Every picture of her showed nothing but a melancholic look or sad look, never a smile. Nice to meet you too, Ace said, approaching her and giving her a hug. Welcome to the family now, sister. And hey there, little runt. You got a lot bigger. And who are these three? Ace asked, beaming as he looked at his nieces and nephew, who were either shy-looking or beaming up at him. These are my baby sisters and little brother, Pixie said, immediately latching onto her uncle's leg and beaming up at him. Yeah, and what are your names, munchkins? Ace asked, grinning at his new nephew and nieces. This is Linlin, Caramel, and Jordan, Pixie said, pointing at her siblings in turn as she introduced them. Hi, Uncle Ace. Jordan launched himself at his uncle with Linlin right behind while Caramel held onto her big sister's hand. Hey there, runts. Ace ruffled each child's hair fondly and then introduced his crewmates to his brother and his brother's family and crew. Unfortunately, things have been a bit tense around here as of late. Someone's been spreading some false information about humans, and someone killed the queen. There's even someone after the mermaid princess. So try not to take it personally if the fishmen don't trust or like you all, Ace warned the Straw Hats after the introductions were over, although he noticed that none of them looked the least bit surprised to hear this aside from Amande and the kid. And he was surprised to see that there was another child on the crew, although she looked a bit older than the little monkeys. Not a problem, Luffy said, not looking bothered by that information at all. Sora-chan, why don't you stay close to the little ones just in case? Sanji asked his charge, who nodded her head and moved closer to the little prince and princesses, Linlin climbing onto the older girl fearlessly and clinging to her back like a koala. Don't worry, Captain. I'll keep the little princesses and prince safe, Sora promised her captain, who smiled and patted her head. I know you will, Sora-chan. Thanks for helping us watch after them, Luffy said, and he knew what Sanji was doing. Luffy was the strongest person on the crew, and they all knew it. And Ammon was just as strong as him and had more experience at fighting than he did. And there was no way in hell the two of them would leave their children alone when there was a chance of someone nearby being hostile to the little ones. By asking Sora to keep an eye out for the little ones, Sanji was not just giving his king and queen an extra pair of close eyes on the children, but was also making sure his charge would be in the safest spot possible, right next to the king and queen. Sora beamed, happy at the chance of being useful, and immediately held Pixie and Caramel's hands since Linlin was clinging to her back still. Jordan was just happy to be held in his mother's arms and getting to cuddle her as he looked around curiously. Come on, Luffy, let's go introduce you to King Neptune, Ace said, grinning at his brother, who smiled brightly at him and held Pixie's other hand as the family moved to follow after Ace and Marco and Ymir. What should we be doing? Sasha asked, looking at the other members of the crew, specifically Zoro as the first mate, for their orders. You can explore if you want or go with Nami to get some supplies. Do whatever you want as long as it doesn't end up with us having to break the island to save you, Zoro said, shrugging it off as he wandered in a random direction. Nami had already gone off to haggle for supplies with whatever shops would actually let her buy them, while Jolin went with her, since having a fishman with her may help given how tense things were recently. Robin was walking off to go look at the poneglyph again, and everyone else was already wandering away to do whatever it is they wanted to do here as they waited for Hody Jones to make his move so that they could kick his ass and be done with it. They all knew what was coming up. The damage to the candy factory, Luffy taking the blame, and then claiming he was going to kick Big Mom's ass in order to make Fishman Island his territory. They wondered if Ammon being here, or Deifuku and Smoothie, since they were less than an hour behind the Straw Hats, would change anything. Knowing their captain, probably not. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.